Book 6, Chapter 13 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 13, in which Ferdinand has the honor of dining with Mr. Bond Sharpe. When Ferdinand arrived at Mr. Bond Sharpe's, he was welcomed by his host in a magnificent suite of saloons, and introduced to two of the guests who had previously arrived. The first was a stout man past middle age, whose Epicurean countenance twinkled with humour. This was Lord Castlefish, an Irish peer of great celebrity in the world of luxury and play, keen at a bet, still keener at a dinner. Nobody exactly knew who the other gentleman, Mr. Blandford, really was, but he had the reputation of being enormously rich, and was proportionately respected. He had been about town for the last 20 years, and did not look a day older than at his first appearance. He never spoke of his family, was unmarried, and apparently had no relations, but he had contrived to identify himself with the first men in London, was a member of every club of great repute, and of late years had even become a sort of authority, which was strange, for he had no pretension, was very quiet, and but humbly ambitious, seeking indeed no happier success than to merge in the brilliant crowd, an accepted atom of the influential aggregate. As he was not remarkable for his talents or his person, and as his establishment, though well appointed, offered no singular splendour, it was rather strange that a gentleman who had apparently dropped from the clouds, or crept out of a kennel, should have succeeded in planting himself so vigorously in a soil which shrinks from anything not indigenous, unless it be recommended by very powerful qualities. But Mr. Blandford was good-tempered, and was now easy and experienced, and there was a vague tradition that he was immensely rich, a rumour which Mr. Blandford always contradicted in a manner which skilfully confirmed its truth. "Does Mirabel dine with you, Sharpe?" inquired Lord Castlefish of his host, who nodded assent. "You won't wait for him, I hope," said his lordship. "By the bye, Blandford, you shirked last night." "I promised to look in at the poor Duke's before he went off," said Mr. Blandford. "Oh, he has gone, has he?" said Lord Castlefish. "Does he take his cook with him?" But here the servant ushered in Count Alcibiades de Mirabel, Charles Doricourt, and Mr. Bevil. "Excellent, Sharpe! How do you do?" exclaimed the Count. "Castlefish, what bêtises have you been talking to Crocky about Felix Winchester?" "Good Blandford! Excellent Blandford! How is my good Blandford?" Mr. Bevil was a tall and handsome young man, of a great family and great estate, who passed his life in an imitation of Count Alcibiades de Mirabel. He was always dressed by the same tailor, and it was his pride that his cab or his vis-a-vis was constantly mistaken for the equipage of his model. And really now, as the shade stood beside its substance, quite as tall, almost as good-looking, with the satin-lined coat thrown open with the same style of flowing grandeur, and revealing a breastplate of starched cambric scarcely less broad and brilliant, the uninitiated might have held the resemblance as perfect. The wristbands were turned up with not less compact precision, and were fastened by jewelled studs that glittered with not less radiancy. The satin waistcoat, the creaseless hosen were the same, and if the foot were not quite as small, Its Parisian polish was not less bright. But here, unfortunately, Mr. Beville's mimetic powers deserted him. We start, for soul is wanting there. The Count Mirabel could talk at all times, and at all times well. Mr. Beville never opened his mouth. Practised in the world, the Count Mirabel was nevertheless the child of impulse, though a native grace, and an intuitive knowledge of mankind, made every word pleasing and every act appropriate. Mr. Beville was all art, and he had not the talent to conceal it. The Count Mirabel was gay, careless, generous. Mr. Beville was solemn, calculating, and rather a screw. It seemed that the Count Mirabel's feelings grew daily more fresh, and his faculty of enjoyment more keen and relishing. It seemed that Mr. Beville could never have been a child, but that he must have issued to the world ready equipped, like Minerva, with a cane instead of a lance, and a fancy hat instead of a helmet. His essence of high breeding was never to be astonished, and he never permitted himself to smile, except in the society of intimate friends. Charles Doricourt was another friend of the Count Mirabel, but not his imitator. His feelings were really worn, but it was a fact he always concealed. He had entered life at a remarkably early age, and had experienced every scrape to which youthful flesh is heir. Any other man but Charles Doricourt must have sunk beneath these accumulated disasters, but Charles Doricourt always swam. Nature had given him an intrepid soul, experience had cased his heart with iron. But he always smiled, and audacious, cool and cutting, and very easy, he thoroughly despised mankind, upon whose weaknesses he practised without remorse. But he was polished and amusing, and faithful to his friends. The world admired him and called him Disraeli, from which it will be inferred that he was a privileged person, and was applauded for 1,000 actions, which in anyone else would have been met with decided reprobation. "Who is that young man?" inquired the Count Mirabel of Mr. Bond Sharpe, taking his host aside, and pretending to look at a picture. "He is Captain Armine, the only son of Sir Ratcliffe Armine. He has just returned to England after a long absence." I like his appearance," said the Count. "It is very distinguished." Dinner and Lord Catchimwhocan were announced at the same moment. Captain Armine found himself seated next to the Count Mirabel. The dinners at Mr. Bond Sharpe's were dinners which his guests came to eat. Mr. Bond Sharpe had engaged for his clubhouse the most celebrated of living artists, a gentleman who, it was said, received 1,000 a year, whose convenience was studied by a chariot, and amusement secured by a box at the French play. There was, therefore, at first little conversation, save criticism on the performances before them, and that chiefly panegyrical. Each dish was delicious, each wine exquisite, and yet, even in these occasional remarks, Ferdinand was pleased with the lively fancy of his neighbour, affording an elegant contrast to the somewhat gross unction with which Lord Castlefyshe, whose very soul seemed wrapped up in his occupation, occasionally expressed himself. "Will you take some wine, Captain Armine?" said the Count Mirabel, with a winning smile. "You have recently returned here?" "Very recently," said Ferdinand. "And you are glad?" "As it may be. I hardly know whether to rejoice or not." "Then by all means rejoice," said the Count; "for if you are in doubt, it surely must be best to decide upon being pleased." I think it is the most infernal country there ever was, said Lord Catchimwhocan. My dear Catch, said the Count Mirabel, you think so, do you? You make a mistake. You think no such thing, my dear Catch. Why is it the most infernal? Is it because the women are the handsomest, or because the horses are the best? Is it because it is the only country where you can get a good dinner, or because it is the only country where there are fine wines? Or is it because it is the only place where you can get a coat made, or where you can play without being cheated, or where you can listen to an opera without your ears being destroyed? Now, my dear Catch, you pass your life in dressing and in playing hazard, in eating good dinners, in drinking good wines, in making love, in going to the opera, and in riding fine horses. Of what, then, have you to complain? Oh, the damned climate! On the contrary, it is the only good climate there is. In England you can go out every day, and at all hours, and then, to those who love variety like myself, you are not sure of seeing the same sky every morning you rise, which, for my part, I think the greatest of all existing sources of ennui. You reconcile me to my country, Count, said Ferdinand, smiling. Ah, you are a sensible man, but that dear Catch is always repeating nonsense which he hears from somebody else. Tomorrow, he added in a low voice, he will be for the climate. The conversation of men, when they congregate together, is generally dedicated to one or two subjects, politics or women. In the present instance, the party was not political, and it was the fair sex, and particularly the most charming portion of it, in the good metropolis of England, that were subject to poignant criticism or the profound speculation of these practical philosophers. There was scarcely a celebrated beauty in London, from the proud peeress to the vain opera dancer, whose charms and conduct were not submitted to their masterly analysis. And yet it would be but fair to admit that their critical ability was more eminent and satisfactory than their abstract reasoning upon this interesting topic, for it was curious to observe that, though everyone present piqued himself upon his profound knowledge of the sex, not two of the sages agreed in the constituent principles of female character. One declared that women were governed by their feelings, another maintained that they had no heart, a third propounded that it was all imagination, a fourth that it was all vanity. Lord Castlefish muttered something about their passions, and Charlie Doricourt declared that they had no passions whatever. But they all agreed in one thing, to wit, that the man who permitted himself a moment's uneasiness about a woman was a fool. All this time Captain Armine spoke little, but ever to the purpose, and chiefly to the Count Mirabel, who pleased him, being very handsome, and, moreover, of a distinguished appearance. This silence on the part of Ferdinand made him a general favourite, and even Mr. Bevil whispered his approbation to Lord Catchimwhocan. The fact is, said Charles Doricourt, it is only boys and old men who are plagued by women. They take advantage of either state of childhood, Castlefish? In that respect, then, somewhat resembling you, Charlie, replied his lordship, who did not admire the appeal, for no one can doubt you plagued your father. I was out of my teens, fortunately, before you played écarté. Come, good old fish, said Count Mirabel, take a glass of claret, and do not look so fierce. You know very well that Charlie learned everything of you. He never learned from me to spend a fortune upon an actress, said his lordship. I have spent a fortune, but thank heaven it was on myself. Well, as for that, said the Count, I think there is something great in being ruined for one's friends. If I were as rich as I might have been, I would not spend much on myself. My wants are few: a fine house, fine carriages, fine horses, a complete wardrobe, the best opera box, the first cook, and pocket money. That is all I require. I have these, and I get on pretty well. But if I had a princely fortune, I would make every good fellow I know quite happy. Well, said Charles Doricourt, you are a lucky fellow, Mirabel. I have had horses, houses, carriages, opera boxes, and cooks, and I have had a great estate, but pocket money I never could get. Pocket money was the one thing which always cost me the most to buy of all. The conversation now fell upon the theatre. Mr. Bond Sharpe was determined to have a theatre. He believed it was reserved for him to revive the drama. Mr. Bond Sharpe piqued himself upon his patronage of the stage. He certainly had a great admiration of actresses. There was something in the management of a great theatre which pleased the somewhat imperial fancy of Mr. Bond Sharpe. The manager of a great theatre is a kind of monarch. Mr. Bond Sharpe longed to seat himself on the throne, with the prettiest women in London for his court, and all his fashionable friends rallying round their sovereign. He had an impression that great results might be obtained with his organising energy and illimitable capital. Mr. Bond Sharpe had unbounded confidence in the power of capital. Capital was his deity. He was confident that it could always produce alike genius and triumph. Mr. Bond Sharpe was right. Capital is a wonderful thing, but we are scarcely aware of this fact until we are past 30, and then, by some singular process, we will not now stop to analyze, one's capital is in general sensibly diminished. As men advance in life, all passions resolve themselves into money. Love, ambition, even poetry, end in this. Are you going to Shropshire's this autumn, Charlie? Said Lord Catchimwhocan. Yes, I shall go. I don't think I shall, said his lordship. It is such a bore. It is rather a bore, but he is a good fellow. I shall go, said Count Mirabel. You are not afraid of being bored, said Ferdinand, smiling. Between ourselves, I do not understand what this being bored is, said the Count. He who is bored appears to me a bore. To be bored supposes the inability of being amused. You must be a dull fellow. Wherever I may be, I thank heaven that I am always diverted. But you have such nerves, Mirabel, said Lord Catchimwhocan. By Jove, I envy you. You are never floored. Floored? What an idea! What should floor me? I live to amuse myself, and I do nothing that does not amuse me. Why should I be floored? Why, I do not know, but every other man is floored now and then. As for me, my spirits are sometimes something dreadful. When you have been losing. Well, we cannot always win, can we, Sharpe? That would not do. But, by Jove, you are always in good humour, Mirabel, when you lose. Fancy a man ever being in low spirits, said the Count Mirabel. Life is too short for such bêtises. The most unfortunate wretch alive calculates unconsciously that it is better to live than to die. Well, then, he has something in his favour. Existence is a pleasure, and the greatest. The world cannot rob us of that, And if it is better to live than to die, it is better to live in a good humour than a bad one. If a man be convinced that existence is the greatest pleasure, his happiness may be increased by good fortune, but it will be essentially independent of it. He who feels that the greatest source of pleasure always remains to him ought never to be miserable. The sun shines on all. Every man can go to sleep. If you cannot ride a fine horse, it is something to look upon one. If you have not a fine dinner, there is some amusement in a crust of bread and Gruyere. Feel slightly, think little, never plan, never brood. Everything depends upon the circulation. Take care of it. Take the world as you find it. Enjoy everything. Vive la bagatelle. Here the gentlemen rose, took their coffee, and ordered their carriages. Come with us, said Count Mirabel to Ferdinand. Our hero accepted the offer of his agreeable acquaintance. There was a great prancing and rushing of cabs and vis-a-vis at Mr. Bonsharp's door, and in a few minutes the whole party were dashing up St. James Street, where they stopped before a splendid building, resplendent with lights and illuminated curtains. Come, we will make you an honorary member, mon cher Captain Armine, said the Count, and do not say Lasciate ogni speranza when you enter here. They ascended a magnificent staircase, and entered a sumptuous and crowded saloon, in which the entrance of Count Mirabel and his friends made no little sensation. Mr. Bonsharp glided along, dropping oracular sentences, without condescending to stop to speak to those whom he addressed. Charlie Doricourt and Mr. Blandford walked away together, towards a further apartment. Lord Castlefish and Lord Catchimwhocan were soon busied with écarté. Well, Fanville, good general, how do you do? said Count Mirabel. Where have you dined to-day? At the Balcombes? You are a very brave man, mon general. Ah, stock, good stock, excellent stock, he continued, addressing Mr. Million de Stockville. That Burgundy you sent me is capital. How are you, my dear fellow? Quite well? Fitzwarren, I did that for you. Your business is all right. Ah, my good Massey, mon cher, mon brave. Anderson will let you have that horse. And what is doing here? Is there any fun? Fitzwarren, let me introduce you to my friend Captain Armine, in a lower tone. Excellent Garcon. You will like him very much. We have been all dining at Bond's. A good dinner? Of course a good dinner. I should like to see a man who would give me a bad dinner. That would be a bêtise. To ask me to dine, and then give me a bad dinner. I say, Mirabel, exclaimed a young man, have you seen Horace Poppington about the match? It is arranged. 'Tis the day after to-morrow, at 9 o'clock. Well, I bet on you, you know. Of course you bet on me. Would you think of betting on that good Pop? With that gun? Pah! Eh bien! I shall go in the next room. And the Count walked away, followed by Mr. Bevil. Ferdinand remained talking for some time with Lord Fitzwarren. By degrees the great saloon had become somewhat thinner. Some had stolen away to the house, where a division was expected. Quiet men, who just looked in after dinner, had retired, and the playmen were engaged in the contiguous apartments. Mr. Bonsharp approached Ferdinand, and Lord Fitzwarren took his opportunity of withdrawing. I believe you never play, Captain Armine, said Mr. Bonsharp. Never, said Ferdinand. You are quite right. I am rather surprised at your being of that opinion, said Ferdinand with a smile. Mr. Bond Sharp shrugged his shoulders. There will always be votaries enough, said Mr. Bond Sharp, whatever may be my opinion. This is a magnificent establishment of yours, said Ferdinand. Yes, it is a very magnificent establishment. I have spared no expense to produce the most perfect thing of the kind in Europe. And it is the most perfect thing of the kind. I am confident that no noble in any country has an establishment better appointed. I dispatched an agent to the Continent to procure this furniture. His commission had no limit, and he was absent 2 years. My cook was with Charles X. The cellar is the most choice and considerable that was ever collected. I take a pride in the thing, but I'd lose money by it. Indeed, I have made a fortune, there is no doubt of that, but I did not make it here. It is a great thing to make a fortune, said Ferdinand. Very great, said Mr. Bond Sharp. There is only one thing greater, and that is to keep it when made. Ferdinand smiled. Many men make fortunes, few can keep them, said Mr. Bond Sharp. Money is power, and rare are the heads that can withstand the possession of great power. At any rate, it is to be hoped that you have discovered this more important secret, said Ferdinand, though I confess to judge from my own experience, I should fear that you are too generous. I had forgotten that to which you allude, said his companion quietly, but with regard to myself, whatever may be my end, I have not yet reached my acme. You have at least my good wishes, said Ferdinand. I may some day claim them, said Mr. Bond Sharp. My position, he continued, is difficult. I have risen by pursuits which the world does not consider reputable, yet if I had not had recourse to them, I should be less than nothing. My mind, I think, is equal to my fortune. I am still young, and I would now avail myself of my power and establish myself in the land, a recognized member of society. But this cannot be. Society shrinks from an obscure foundling, a prize fighter, a leg, a hell-keeper, and a usurer. Debarred, therefore, from a fair theatre for my energy and capital, I am forced to occupy, perhaps exhaust, myself in multiplied speculations. Hitherto they have flourished, and perhaps my theatre or my newspaper may be as profitable as my stud, but I would gladly emancipate myself. These efforts seem to me, as it were, unnecessary and unnatural. The great object has been gained. It is a tempting of fate. I have sometimes thought myself the Napoleon of the sporting world. I may yet find my St. Helena. Forewarned, forearmed, Mr. Sharp. I move in a magic circle. It is difficult to extricate myself from it. Now, for instance, there is not a man in the room who is not my slave. You see how they treat me. They place me upon an equality with them. They know my weakness. They fool me to the top of my bent. And yet there is not a man in that room who, if I were to break tomorrow, would walk down St. James Street to serve me. Yes, there is one. There is the Count. He has a great and generous soul. I believe Count Mirabel sympathizes with my situation. I believe he does not think, because a man has risen from an origin the most ignoble and obscure to a powerful position, by great courage and dexterity, and let me add also, by some profound thought, by struggling too, Be it remembered with a class of society as little scrupulous, though not so skilful as himself, that he is necessarily an infamous character. What if, at 18 years of age, without a friend in the world, trusting to the powerful frame and intrepid spirit with which nature had endowed me, I flung myself into the ring? Who should be a gladiator if I were not? Is that a crime? What if, at a later period, with a brain for calculation which none can rival, I invariably succeeded in that in which the greatest men in the country fail? Am I to be branded because I have made 500,000 by a good book? What if I have kept a gambling house? From the back parlour of an oyster shop, my hazard table has been removed to this palace. Had the play been foul, this metamorphosis would never have occurred. It is true I am a usurer. My dear sir, if all the usurers in this great metropolis could only pass in procession before you at this moment, how you would start! You might find some right honourables among them, many a great functionary, many a grave magistrate, fathers of families, the very models of respectable characters, patrons and presidents of charitable institutions, and subscribers for the suppression of those very gaming houses whose victims, in 9 cases out of 10, are their principal customers. I speak not in bitterness. On the whole, I must not complain of the world, but I have seen a great deal of mankind, and more than most, of what is considered its worst portion. The world, Captain Armine, believe me, is neither so bad nor so good as some are apt to suppose. And after all, said Mr. Bond Sharpe, shrugging up his shoulders, perhaps we ought to say with our friend the Count, Vive la bagatelle. Will you take some supper? End of Book 6, Chapter 13. Book 6, Chapter 14 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 14. Miss Grandison piques the curiosity of Lord Montfort, and Count Mirabel drives Ferdinand down to Richmond, which drive ends in an agreeable adventure and an unexpected confidence. The discovery that Henrietta Temple was the secret object of Ferdinand's unhappy passion was a secret which Miss Grandison prized like a true woman. Not only had she made this discovery, but from her previous knowledge and her observation during her late interview with Miss Temple, Catherine was persuaded that Henrietta must still love her cousin as before. Miss Grandison was attached to Henrietta. She was interested in her cousin's welfare, and devoted to the Armine family. All her thoughts and all her energies were engaged in counteracting, if possible, the consequences of those unhappy misconceptions which had placed them all in this painful position. It was on the next day that she had promised to accompany the Duchess and Henrietta on a water excursion. Lord Montfort was to be their cavalier. In the morning she found herself alone with his lordship in St. James' Square. "What a charming day!" said Miss Grandison. "I anticipate so much pleasure. Who is our party?" "Ourselves alone," said Lord Montfort. "Lady Armine cannot come, and Captain Armine is engaged. I fear you will find it very dull, Miss Grandison." Oh, not at all. By the by, do you know I was surprised yesterday at finding that Ferdinand and Henrietta were such old acquaintances. Were you? Said Lord Montfort, in a peculiar tone. It is odd that Ferdinand never will go with us anywhere. I think it is very bad taste. I think so too, said Lord Montfort. I should have thought that Henrietta was the very person he would have admired, that he would have been quite glad to be with us. I can easily understand his being wearied to death with the cousin, said Miss Grandison, but Henrietta, it is so strange that he should not avail himself of the delight of being with her. Do you really think that such a cousin as Miss Grandison can drive him away? Why, to tell you the truth, dear Lord Montfort, Ferdinand is placed in a very awkward position with me. You are our friend, and so I speak to you in confidence. Sir Ratcliffe and Lady Armine both expect that Ferdinand and myself are going to be married. Now, neither of us has the slightest intention of anything of the sort. Very strange indeed, said Lord Montfort. The world will be much astonished, more so than myself, for I confess to a latent suspicion on the subject. Yes, I was aware of that, said Miss Grandison, or I should not have spoken with so much frankness. For my own part, I think we are very wise to insist upon having our own way, for an ill-assorted marriage must be a most melancholy business. Miss Grandison spoke with an air almost of levity, which was rather unusual with her. An ill-assorted marriage, said Lord Montfort. And what do you call an ill-assorted marriage, Miss Grandison? Why, many circumstances might constitute such a union, said Catherine. But I think, if one of the parties were in love with another person, that would be quite sufficient to ensure a tolerable portion of wretchedness. I think so too, said Lord Montfort. An union, under such circumstances, would be ill-assorted. But, Miss Grandison, is that not the situation? He added with a faint smile. That is scarcely a fair question, said Catherine with gaiety. But there is no doubt Ferdinand Armine is. Indeed, yes, he is in love, desperately in love, that I have long discovered. I wonder with whom it can be. I wonder, said Lord Montfort. Do you? Said Miss Grandison. Well, I have sometimes thought that you might have a latent suspicion on that subject too. I thought you were his confidant. I, said Lord Montfort. I, of all men in the world? And why not you of all men in the world? Said Miss Grandison. Our intimacy is so slight, said Lord Montfort. Said Miss Grandison. And now I think of it, it does appear to me very strange how we have all become suddenly such intimate friends. The Armines and your family, not previously acquainted, Miss Temple too, and unknown to my aunt and uncle, and yet we never live now out of each other's sight. I am sure I am grateful for it. I am sure it is very agreeable, but still it does appear to me to be very odd. I wonder what the reason can be. It is that you are so charming, Miss Grandison, said Lord Montfort. A compliment from you. Indeed, no compliment, dearest Miss Grandison, said Lord Montfort, drawing near her. Favoured as Miss Temple is in so many respects, in none, in my opinion, is she more fortunate than in the possession of so admirable a friend. Not even in the possession of so admirable a lover, my lord? All must love Miss Temple, who are acquainted with her, said Lord Montfort, seriously. Indeed, I think so, said Catherine, in a more subdued voice. I love her. Her career fills me with a strange and singular interest. May she be happy, for happiness she indeed deserves. I have no fonder wish than to secure that happiness, Miss Grandison, said Lord Montfort. By any means, he added. She is so interesting, said Catherine. When you first knew her, she was very ill? Very. She seems quite recovered. I hope so. Mr. Temple says her spirits are not what they used to be. I wonder what was the matter with her. Lord Montfort was silent. I cannot bear to see a fine spirit broken, continued Miss Grandison. There was Ferdinand. Oh, if you had but known my cousin before he was unhappy. Oh, that was a spirit. He was the most brilliant being that ever lived. And then I was with him during all his illness. It was so terrible. I almost wish we could have loved each other. It is very strange. He must have been ill at Armine at the very time Henrietta was ill in Italy. And I was with him in England while you were solacing her. And now we are all friends. There seems a sort of strange destiny in our lots, does there not? A happy lot that can in any way be connected with Miss Grandison, said Lord Montfort. At this moment her Grace and Henrietta entered. The carriage was ready, and in a few minutes they were driving to Whitehall Stairs, where a beautiful boat awaited them. In the meantime, Ferdinand Armine was revolving the strange occurrences of yesterday. Altogether it was an exciting and satisfactory day. In the first place, he had extricated himself from his most pressing difficulties. In the next, he had been greatly amused, and thirdly, he had made a very interesting acquaintance, for such he esteemed Count Mirabel. Just at the moment when, lounging over a very late breakfast, he was thinking of Bond Sharpe and his great career, and then turning in his mind whether it were possible to follow the gay counsels of his friends of yesterday, and never plague himself about a woman again, the Count Mirabel was announced. Mon cher Armine, said the Count, you see I kept my promise, and would find you at home. The Count stood before him, the best dressed man in London, fresh and gay as a bird, with not a care on his sparkling visage, and his eye bright with bonhomie. And yet Count Mirabel had been the very last to desert the recent mysteries of Mr. Bond Sharpe, and, as usual, the dappled light of dawn had guided him to his luxurious bed, that bed which always afforded him serene slumbers, whatever might be the adventures of the day, or the result of the night's campaign. How the Count Mirabel did laugh at those poor devils who wake only to moralize over their own folly with broken spirits and aching heads. Care he knew nothing about. Time he defied. Indisposition he could not comprehend. He had never been ill in his life, even for 5 minutes. Ferdinand was really very glad to see him. There was something in Count Mirabel's very presence which put everybody in good spirits. His light-heartedness was caught by all. Melancholy was a farce in the presence of his smile, and there was no possible combination of scrapes that could withstand his kind and brilliant raillery. At the present moment, Ferdinand was in a sufficiently good humour with his destiny, and he kept up the ball with effect, so that nearly an hour passed in amusing conversation. You were a stranger among us yesterday, said Count Mirabel. I think you were rather diverted. I saw you did justice to that excellent Bond Sharpe. That shows that you have a mind above prejudice. Do you know he was by far the best man at the table, except ourselves? Ferdinand smiled. It is true, he has a heart and a brain. Old Castlefish has neither. As for the rest of our friends, Some have hearts without brains, and the rest brains without hearts. Which do you prefer?' ''Tis a fine question,' said Ferdinand, 'and yet I confess I should like to be callous.' 'Ah, but you cannot be,' said the Count. 'You have a soul of great sensibility. I see that in a moment.' 'You see very far and very quickly, Count Mirabel,' said Ferdinand with a little reserve. 'Yes, in a minute,' said the Count. 'In a minute I read a person's character. I know you are very much in love, because you changed countenance yesterday when we were talking of women.' Ferdinand changed countenance again. 'You are a very extraordinary man, Count,' he at length observed. 'Of course. But, mon cher Armine, what a fine day this is! What are you going to do with yourself?' 'Nothing. I never do anything,' said Ferdinand, in an almost mournful tone. 'A melancholy man, que bêtise! I will cure you. I will be your friend and put you all right. Now, we will just drive down to Richmond. We will have a light dinner, a flounder, a cutlet, a bottle of champagne, and then we will go in the French play. I will introduce you to Jenny Vertpré. She is full of wit. Perhaps she will ask us to supper. Allons, mon ami, mon cher Armine, allons, mon brave.' Ceremony was a farce with Alcibiades de Mirabel. Ferdinand had nothing to do. He was attracted to his companion. The effervescence produced by yesterday's fortunate adventure had not quite subsided. He was determined to forget his sorrows, and if only for a day, join in the lively chorus of Vive la Bagatelle. So in a few moments he was safely ensconced in the most perfect cabriolet in London, whirled along by a horse that stepped out with a proud consciousness of its master. The Count Mirabel enjoyed the drive to Richmond as if he had never been to Richmond in his life. The warm sun, the western breeze, every object he passed and that passed him, called for his praise or observation. He inoculated Ferdinand with his gaiety, as Ferdinand listened to his light lively tales, and his flying remarks, so full of merriment and poignant truth, and daring fancy. When they had arrived at the Star and Garter, and ordered their dinner, they strolled into the park, along the terrace walk, and they had not proceeded 50 paces when they came up with the Duchess and her party, who were resting on a bench and looking over the valley. Ferdinand would gladly have bowed and passed on, but that was impossible. He was obliged to stop and speak to them, and it was difficult to disembarrass himself of friends who greeted him so kindly. Ferdinand presented his companion. The ladies were charmed to know so celebrated a gentleman, of whom they had heard so much. Count Mirabel, who had the finest tact in the world, but whose secret spell, after all, was perhaps only that he was always natural, adapted himself in a moment to the characters, the scene, and the occasion. He was quite delighted at these sources of amusement that had so unexpectedly revealed themselves, and in a few minutes they had all agreed to walk together, and in due time the Duchess was begging Ferdinand and his friend to dine with them. Before Ferdinand could frame an excuse, Count Mirabel had accepted the proposition. After passing the morning together so agreeably, to go and dine in separate rooms, it would be a bêtise. This word, bêtise, settled everything with Count Mirabel. When once he declared that anything was a bêtise, he would hear no more. It was a charming stroll. Never was Count Mirabel more playful, more engaging, more completely winning. Henrietta and Katherine alike smiled upon him. and the Duchess was quite enchanted. Even Lord Montfort, who might rather have entertained a prejudice against the Count before he knew him, though none could after, and who was prepared for something rather brilliant, but pretending, presumptuous, fantastic, and affected, quite yielded to his amiable gaiety, and his racy and thoroughly genuine and simple manner. So they walked and talked and laughed, and all agreed that it was the most fortunately fine day, and the most felicitous rencontre that had ever occurred until the dinner hour was at hand. The Count was at her Grace's side, and she was leaning on Miss Temple's arm. Lord Montfort and Miss Grandison had fallen back a pace, as their party had increased. Ferdinand fluttered between Miss Temple and his cousin, but would have attached himself to the latter had not Miss Temple occasionally addressed him. He was glad, however, when they returned to dinner. "We have only availed ourselves of your Grace's permission to join our dinners," said Count Mirabel, offering the Duchess his arm. He placed himself at the head of the table. Lord Montfort took the other end. To the surprise of Ferdinand, Miss Grandison, with a heedlessness that was quite remarkable, seated herself next to the Duchess, so that Ferdinand was obliged to sit by Henrietta Temple, who was thus separated from Lord Montfort. The dinner was gay, as the stroll. Ferdinand was the only person who was silent. "How amusing he is!" said Miss Temple, turning to Ferdinand and speaking in an undertone. "Yes, I envy him his gaiety." "Be gay." "I thank you. I dare say I shall in time. I have not yet quite embraced all Count Mirabel's philosophy. He says that the man who plagues himself for 5 minutes about a woman is an idiot. When I think the same, which I hope I may soon, I dare say I shall be as gay." Miss Temple addressed herself no more to Ferdinand. They returned by water. To Ferdinand's great annoyance, the Count did not hesitate for a moment to avail himself of the Duchess's proposal that he and his companion should form part of the crew. He gave immediate orders that his cabriolet should meet him at Whitehall stairs, and Ferdinand found there was no chance of escape. It was a delicious summer evening. The setting sun bathed the bowers of Fulham with refulgent light, just as they were off delicate Rosebank. But the air long continued warm and always soft, and the last few miles of their pleasant voyage were tinted by the young and glittering moon. "I wish we had brought a guitar," said Miss Grandison. "Count Mirabel, I am sure, would sing to us." "And you will sing to us without a guitar, will you not?" said the Count, smiling. "Henrietta, will you sing?" said Miss Grandison. "With you?" "Of course." "Now you must," said the Count. So they did. This gliding home to the metropolis on a summer eve, so soft and still, with beautiful faces, as should always be the case, and with sweet sounds, as was the present, there is something very ravishing in the combination. The heart opens. It is a dangerous moment. As Ferdinand listened once more to the voice of Henrietta, even though it was blended with the sweet tones of Miss Grandison, the passionate past vividly recurred to him. Fortunately he did not sit near her. He had taken care to be the last in the boat. He turned away his face, but its stern expression did not escape the observation of the Count Mirabel. "And now, Count Mirabel, you must really favour us," said the Duchess. "Without a guitar?" said the Count, and he began thrumming on his arm for an accompaniment. "Well, when I was with the Duke d'Angoulême in Spain. We sometimes indulged in a serenade at Seville. I will try to remember one. A Serenade of Seville. 1. Come forth, the star we love is nigh o'er Guadalquivir's grove, and tints each tree with golden light. Ah, Rosalie, one smile from thee were far more bright. 2. Come forth, the flowers that fear to blossom in the sun's career, the moonlight with their odour greet. Ah, Rosalie, one sigh from thee were far more sweet. 3. Come forth, one hour of night, when flowers are fresh and stars are bright, were worth an angel of gaudy day. Then, Rosalie, fly, fly to me, nor longer stay. I hope the lady came, said Miss Temple, after such a pretty song. Of course, said the Count, they always come. Ferdinand, will you sing? Said Miss Grandison. I cannot, Catherine. Henrietta, ask Ferdinand to sing, said Miss Grandison. He makes it a rule never to do anything I ask him, but I am sure you have more influence. Lord Montfort came to the rescue of Miss Temple. Miss Temple has spoken so often to us of your singing, Captain Armine, said his lordship, and yet Lord Montfort, in this allegation, a little departed from the habitual exactitude of his statements. How very strange, thought Ferdinand. Her callousness or her candour baffles me. I will try to sing, he continued aloud, but it is a year really since I have sung. In a voice of singular power and melody, and with an expression which increased as he proceeded, until the singer seemed scarcely able to control his emotions, Captain Armine thus proceeded. Captain Armine's Song. 1. My heart is like a silent lute, some faithless hand has thrown aside. Those chords are dumb, those tones are mute, that once sent forth a voice of pride. Yet even o'er the lute neglected, the wind of heaven will sometimes fly, and even thus the heart dejected will sometimes answer to a sigh. 2. And yet to feel another's power may grasp the prize for which I pine, and others now may pluck the flower I cherished for this heart of mine. No more, no more, the hand forsaking, the lute must fail, and shivered lie in silence, and my heart thus breaking responds not even to a sigh. Miss Temple seemed busied with her shawl. Perhaps she felt the cold. Count Mirabel, next whom she sat, was about to assist her. Her face was turned to the water. It was streaming with tears. Without appearing to notice her, Count Mirabel leant forward and engaged everybody's attention, so that she was unobserved and had time to recover. And yet she was aware that the Count Mirabel had remarked her emotion, and was grateful for his quick and delicate consideration. It was fortunate that Westminster Bridge was now in sight, for after this song of Captain Armine, every one became dull or pensive. Even Count Mirabel was silent. The ladies and Lord Montfort entered their britzka. They bid a cordial adieu to Count Mirabel, and begged him to call upon them in St. James's Square, and the Count and Ferdinand were alone. Cher Armine, said the Count, as he was driving up Charing Cross, Catch told me you were going to marry your cousin. Which of those two young ladies is your cousin? The fair girl, Miss Grandison. So I understood. She is very pretty. But you are not going to marry her, are you? No, I am not. And who is Miss Temple? She is going to be married to Lord Montfort. Diable! But what a fortunate man! What do you think of Miss Temple? I think of her as all I suppose must. She is beautiful. She is the most beautiful woman I ever saw. She marries for money, I suppose? She is the richest heiress in England. She is much richer than my cousin. C'est drôle. But she does not want to marry Lord Montfort. Why? Because, my dear fellow, she is in love with you. By Jove, Mirabel, what a fellow you are! What do you mean? Mon cher Armine, I like you more than anybody. I wish to be, I am, your friend. Here is some cursed contretemps. There is a mystery, and both of you are victims of it. Tell me everything. I will put you right. Ah, my dear Mirabel, it is past even your skill. I thought I could never speak on these things to human being, but I am attracted to you by the same sympathy which you flatter me by expressing for myself. I want a confidant. I need a friend. I am most wretched. Eh bien, we will not go to the French play. As for Jenny Vertpré, we can sup with her any night. Come to my house, and we will talk over everything. But trust me, if you wish to marry Henrietta Temple, you are an idiot if you do not have her. So saying, the Count touched his bright horse, and in a few minutes the cabriolet stopped before a small but admirably appointed house in Berkeley Square. Now, mon cher, said the Count, coffee and confidence. End of Book 6, Chapter 14. Book 6, Chapter 15 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 15, in which the Count Mirabel commences his operations with great success. Is there a more gay and graceful spectacle in the world than Hyde Park at the end of a long sunny morning in the merry months of May and June? Where can we see such beautiful women, such gallant cavaliers, such fine horses, and such brilliant equipages? The scene, too, is worthy of such agreeable accessories, the groves, the gleaming waters, and the triumphal arches. In the distance, the misty heights of Surrey, and the bowery glades of Kensington. It was the day after the memorable voyage from Richmond. Eminent among the glittering throng, Count Mirabel cantered along on his Arabian, scattering gay recognitions and bright words. He reined in his steed beneath a tree, under whose shade was assembled a knot of listless cavaliers. The Count received their congratulations, for this morning he had won his pigeon match. "Only think of that old fool, Castlefyshe, betting on Poppington," said the Count. "I want to see him, old idiot. Who knows where Charlie is?" "I do, Mirabel," said Lord Catchimwhocan. "He has gone to Richmond with Blandford and the two little Frizzlers. That good Blandford! Whenever he is in love, he always gives a dinner. It is a droll way to succeed." "Apropos," "Will you dine with me to-day, Mirabel?" said Mr. de Stockville. "Impossible, my dear fellow. I dine with Fitzwarren." "I say, Mirabel," drawled out a young man, "I saw you yesterday driving a man down to Richmond yourself. Who is your friend?" "No one you know, or will know. 'Tis the best fellow that ever lived. But he is under my guidance, and I shall be very particular to whom he is introduced." "Lord, I wonder who he can be," said the young man. "I say, Mirabel, you will be done on Goshawk." "If you don't take care, I can tell you that." "Thank you, good Coventry. If you like to bet the odds, I will take them." "No, my dear fellow, I do not want to bet, but at the same time you have an opinion that you will not back. That is a luxury, for certainly it is of no use. I would advise you to enjoy it." "Well, I must say, Mirabel," said Lord Catchimwhocan, "I think the same about Goshawk." "Oh no, Catch, you do not think so. You think. Go and take all the odds you can get upon Goshawk. Come now, to morrow you will tell me you have a very pretty book, mon cher Catch?" "But do you really think Goshawk will win?" said Lord Catchimwhocan earnestly. "Certain." "Well, damned if I don't go and take the odds," said his lordship. "Mirabel," said a young noble, moving his horse close to the Count, and speaking in a low voice, "shall you be at home to morrow morning?" "Certainly. But what do you want?" "I am in a devil of a scrape. I do not know what to do. I want you to advise me." The Count moved aside with his cavalier. "And what is it?" said he. "Have you been losing?" No, said the young man, shaking his head. "Much worse. It is the most infernal business. I do not know what I shall do. I think I shall cut my throat." "Fitis, it cannot be very bad, if it be not money." "Oh, my dear Mirabel, you do not know what trouble I am in." "Mon cher Henri, soyez tranquille," said the Count, in a kind voice. "I am your friend. Rest assured I will arrange it. Think no more of it until to morrow at 1 o'clock, and then call on me. If you like, I am at your service at present." No, not here. There are letters." "Ha! Well, to morrow at 1. In the meantime, do not write any nonsense." At this moment the Duchess, with a party of equestrians, passed and bowed to the Count Mirabel. "I say, Mirabel," exclaimed a young man, "who is that girl? I want to know. I have seen her several times lately. By Jove, she is a fine creature." "Do you not know Miss Temple?" said the Count. "Fancy a man not knowing Miss Temple. She is the only woman in London to be looked at." Now there was a great flutter in the band, and nothing but the name of Miss Temple was heard. All vowed they knew her very well, at least by sight, and never thought of anybody else. Some asked the Count to present them. Others meditated plans by which that great result might be obtained. But in the midst of all this agitation, Count Mirabel rode away, and was soon by the very lady's side. "What a charming voyage yesterday," said the Count to Miss Temple. "You were amused?" "Very." "And to think you should all know my friend Armine so well. I was astonished, for he will never go anywhere, or speak to anyone." "You know him intimately?" said Miss Temple. "He is my brother. There is not a human being in the world I love so much. If you only knew him as I know him. Ah, chère Miss Temple, there is not a man in London to be compared with him, so clever and so good. What a heart! So tender! And what talent! There is no one so spirituelle." You have known him long, Count? Always, but of late I find a great change in him. I cannot discover what is the matter with him. He has grown melancholy. I think he will not live. Indeed? No, I am never wrong. That cher Armine will not live. You are his friend, surely. Ah, yes, but I do not know what it is. Even me he cares not for. I contrive sometimes to get him about a little, yesterday, for instance, but to-day, you see, he will not move. There he is, sitting alone, in a dull hotel, with his eyes fixed on the ground, dark as night. Never was a man so changed. I suppose something has happened to him abroad. When you first knew him, I dare say now, he was the gayest of the gay? He was indeed very different, said Miss Temple, turning away her face. You have known that dear Armine a long time? It seems a long time, said Miss Temple. If he dies, and die he must, I do not think I shall ever be in a very good spirits again, said the Count. It is the only thing that would quite upset me. Now, do not you think, Miss Temple, that our cher Armine is the most interesting person you ever met? I believe Captain Armine is admired by all those who know him. He is so good, so tender, and so clever. Lord Montfort, he knows him very well. They were companions in boyhood, I believe, but they have resumed their acquaintance only recently. We must interest Lord Montfort in his case. Lord Montfort must assist in our endeavours to bring him out a little. Lord Montfort needs no prompting, Count. We are all alike interested in Captain Armine's welfare. I wish you would try to find out what is on his mind, said Count Mirabel. After all, men cannot do much. It requires a more delicate sympathy than we can offer. And yet I would do anything for the cher Armine, because I really love him, the same as if he were my brother. He is fortunate in such a friend. Ah, he does not think so any longer, said the Count. He avoids me. He will not tell me anything. Chère Miss Temple, this business haunts me. It will end badly. I know that dear Armine so well. No one knows him like me. His feelings are too strong. No one has such strong feelings. Now, of all my friends, he is the only man I know who is capable of committing suicide. God forbid, said Henrietta Temple with emphasis. I rise every morning with apprehension, said the Count. When I call upon him every day, I tremble as I approach his hotel. Are you indeed serious? Most serious. I knew a man once in the same state. It was the Duc de Crillon. He was my brother friend, like this dear Armine. We were at college together. We were in the same regiment. He was exactly like this dear Armine, young, beautiful, and clever, but with a heart all tenderness, terrible passions. He loved Mademoiselle de Guise, my cousin, the most beautiful girl in France. Pardon me, but I told Armine yesterday that you reminded me of her. They were going to be married, but there was a contretemps. He sent for me. I was in Spain. She married the Viscount de Marsnac. Until that dreadful morning he remained exactly in the same state as our dear Armine. Never was a melancholy so profound. After the ceremony he shot himself. No, no, exclaimed Miss Temple in great agitation. Perfectly true. It is the terrible recollection of that dreadful adventure that overcomes me when I see our dear friend here, because I feel it must be love. I was in hopes it was his cousin, but it is not so. It must be something that has happened abroad. Love alone can account for it. It is not his debts that would so overpower him. What are his debts? I would pay them myself. It is a heart-rending business. I am going to him. How I tremble!" "How good you are!" exclaimed Miss Temple, with streaming eyes. "I shall ever be grateful. I mean, we all must. Oh, do go to him. Go to him directly. Tell him to be happy." "It is the song I ever sing," said the Count. "I wish some of you would come and see him, or send him a message. It is wise to show him that there are some who take interest in his existence. Now, give me that flower, for instance, and let me give it to him from you." "He will not care for it," said Miss Temple. "Try. It is a fancy I have. Let me bear it." Miss Temple gave the flower to the Count, who rode off with his prize. It was about 8 o'clock. Ferdinand was sitting alone in his room, having just parted with Glastonbury, who was going to dine in Brook Street. The sun had set, and yet it was scarcely dark enough for artificial light, particularly for a person without a pursuit. It was just that dreary dismal moment when even the most gay grow pensive if they be alone. And Ferdinand was particularly dull. A reaction had followed the excitement of the last 48 hours, and he was at this moment feeling singularly disconsolate, and upbraiding himself for being so weak as to permit himself to be influenced by Mirabel's fantastic promises and projects, when his door flew open, and the Count, full dressed, and graceful as a Versailles Apollo, stood before him. "Cher ami, I cannot stop 1 minute. I dine with Fitzwarren, and I am late. I have done your business capitally. Here is a pretty flower. Who do you think gave it me? She did, pardy, on condition, however, that I should bear it to you with a message. And what a message! That you should be happy." "Nonsense, my dear Count." "It is true, but I romanced at a fine rate for it. It is the only way with women. She thinks we have known each other since the deluge. Do not betray me. But, my dear fellow, I cannot stop now. Only, mind, all is changed. Instead of being gay, and seeking her society and amusing her, and thus attempting to regain your influence, as we talked of last night, mind, suicide is the system. To morrow I will tell you all. She has a firm mind and a high spirit, which she thinks is principle. If we go upon the tact of last night, she will marry Montfort, and fall in love with you afterwards. That will never do. So we must work upon her fears, her generosity, pity, remorse, and so on. Call upon me to-morrow morning at 2:30, not before, because I have an excellent boy coming to me at 1, who is in a scrape. At 2:30, cher Armine. We will talk more. In the meantime, enjoy your flower, and rest assured that it is your own fault if you do not fling the good Montfort in a very fine ditch." End of Book 6, Chapter 15. Book 6, Chapter 16 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 16, in which Mr. Temple surprises his daughter weeping. The Count Mirabel proceeded with his projects with all the ardour, address, and audacity of one habituated to success. By some means or other, he contrived to see Miss Temple almost daily. He paid assiduous court to the Duchess, on whom he had made a favourable impression from the first. In St. James's Square he met Mr. Temple, who was partial to the society of a distinguished foreigner. He was delighted with Count Mirabel. As for Miss Grandison, the Count absolutely made her his confidante, though he concealed this bold step from Ferdinand. He established his intimacy in the three families, and even mystified Sir Ratcliffe and Lady Armine so completely that they imagined he must be some acquaintance that Ferdinand had made abroad, and they received him accordingly as one of their son's oldest and most cherished friends. But the most amusing circumstance of all was that the Count, who even in business never lost sight of what might divert or interest him, became great friends with Mr. Glastonbury. Count Mirabel comprehended and appreciated that good man's character. All Count Mirabel's efforts were directed to restore the influence of Ferdinand Armine over Henrietta Temple, and with this view he omitted no opportunity of impressing the idea of his absent friend on that lady's susceptible brain. His virtues, his talents, his accomplishments, his sacrifices, but above all, his mysterious sufferings, and the fatal end which the Count was convinced awaited him, were placed before her in a light so vivid that they engrossed her thought and imagination. She could not resist the fascination of talking about Ferdinand Armine to Count Mirabel. He was the constant subject of their discourse. All her feelings now clustered round his image. She had quite abandoned her old plan of marrying him to his cousin. That was desperate. Did she regret it? She scarcely dared urge to herself this secret question. And yet it seemed that her heart, too, would break were Ferdinand another's. But then, what was to become of him? Was he to be left desolate? Was he indeed to die? And Digby, the amiable, generous Digby. Ah, why did she ever meet him? Unfortunate, unhappy woman! And yet she was resolved to be firm. She could not falter. She would be the victim of her duty, even if she died at the altar. Almost she wished that she had ceased to live, and then the recollection of Armine came back to her so vividly, and those long days of passionate delight, all his tenderness and all his truth, for he had been true to her, always had he been true to her. She was not the person who ought to complain of his conduct, and yet she was the person who alone punished him. How different was the generous conduct of his cousin! She had pardoned all, she sympathized with him, she sorrowed for him, she tried to soothe him, she laboured to unite him to a rival. What must he think of herself? How hard-hearted, how selfish must the contrast prove her? Could he indeed believe now that she had ever loved him? Oh no, he must despise her. He must believe that she was sacrificing her heart to the splendour of rank. Oh, could he believe this? Her Ferdinand, her romantic Ferdinand, who had thrown fortune and power to the winds, but to gain that very heart. What a return had she made him! And for all his fidelity he was punished, lone, disconsolate, forlorn, overpowered by vulgar cares, heartbroken, meditating even death. The picture was too terrible, too harrowing. She hid her face in the pillow of the sofa on which she was seated, and wept bitterly. She felt an arm softly twined round her waist. She looked up. It was her father. "My child," he said, "you are agitated." "Yes, yes, I am agitated," she said in a low voice. "You are unwell." "Worse than unwell." "Tell me what ails you, Henrietta." "Grief, for which there is no cure." "Indeed, I am greatly astonished." His daughter only sighed. "Speak to me, Henrietta. Tell me what has happened." "I cannot speak. Nothing has happened. I have nothing to say." "To see you thus makes me quite unhappy," said Mr. Temple. "If only for my sake, let me know the cause of this overwhelming emotion." "It is a cause that will not please you. Forget, sir, what you have seen." "A father cannot. I entreat you tell me. If you love me, Henrietta, speak." Sir, I was thinking of the past." "Is it so bitter?" "Ah, that I should live!" said Miss Temple.
"Henrietta, my own Henrietta, my child, I beseech you tell me all. Something has occurred, something must have occurred to revive such strong feelings. Has I know not what to say, but so much happens that surprises me. I know, I have heard that you have seen one who once influenced your feelings, that you have been thrown in unexpected contact with him. He has not dared—"
"Say nothing harshly of him," said Miss Temple wildly. "I will not bear it, even from you."
"My daughter!"
"Ay, your daughter, but still a woman. Do I murmur? Do I complain? Have I urged you to compromise your honour? I am ready for the sacrifice. My conduct is yours, but my feelings are my own."
"Sacrifice, Henrietta! What sacrifice? I have heard only of your happiness. I have thought only of your happiness. This is a strange return."
"Father, forget what you have seen. Forgive what I have said. But let this subject drop for ever."
"It cannot drop here. Captain Armine prefers his suit?" continued Mr. Temple, in a tone of stern enquiry.
"What if he did? He has a right to do so."
"As good a right as he had before. You are rich now, Henrietta, and he perhaps would be faithful."
"Oh, Ferdinand!"
exclaimed Miss Temple, lifting up her hands and eyes to heaven.
"And you must endure even this?"
"Henrietta," said Mr. Temple in a voice of affected calmness, as he seated himself by her side, "listen to me. I am not a harsh parent. You cannot upbraid me with insensibility to your feelings. They have ever engrossed my thought and care, and how to gratify, and when necessary, how to soothe them, has long been the principal occupation of my life. If you have known misery, girl, you made that misery yourself. It was not I that involved you in secret engagements and clandestine correspondence. It was not I that made you, my daughter, on whom I have lavished all the solicitude of long years, the dupe of the first calculating libertine who dared to trifle with your affections and betray your heart."
"'Tis false!" exclaimed Miss Temple, interrupting him. "He is as true and pure as I am, more, much more," she added in a voice of anguish.
"No doubt he has convinced you of it," said Mr. Temple, with a laughing sneer. "Now, mark me," he continued, resuming his calm tone. "You interrupted me. Listen to me. You are the betrothed bride of Lord Montfort. Lord Montfort, my friend, the man I love most in the world, the most generous, the most noble, the most virtuous, the most gifted of human beings. You gave him your hand freely, under circumstances which, even if he did not possess every quality that ought to secure the affection of a woman, should bind you to him with an unswerving faith. Falter one jot, and I whistle you off for ever. You are no more daughter of mine. I am as firm as I am fond, nor would I do this but that I know well I am doing rightly. Yes, take this Armine once more to your heart, and you receive my curse, the deepest, the sternest, the deadliest that ever descended on a daughter's head."
"My father, my dear, dear father,
my beloved father!" exclaimed Miss Temple, throwing herself at his feet. "Oh, do not say so! Oh, recall those words, those wild, those terrible words! Indeed, indeed, my heart is breaking. Pity me, pity me! For God's sake, pity me!" "I would do more than pity you. I would save you." "It is not as you think," she continued with streaming eyes. "Indeed it is not. He has not preferred his suit. He has urged no claim. He has behaved in the most delicate, the most honourable, the most considerate manner. He has thought only of my situation. He met me by accident. My friends are his friends. They know not what has taken place between us. He has not breathed it to human being. He has absented himself from his home that we might not meet." "You must marry Lord Montfort at once." "Oh, my father, even as you like. But do not curse me. Dream not of such terrible things. Recall those fearful words. Love me, love me. Say I am your child. And Digby, I am true to Digby. But indeed, can I recall the past? Can I alter it? Its memory overcame me. Digby knows all. Digby knows we met. He did not curse me. He was kind and gentle. Oh, my father!" "My Henrietta," said Mr. Temple, moved. "My child." "Oh, my father, I will do all you wish, but speak not again as you have spoken of Ferdinand. We have done him great injustice. I have done him great injury. He is good and pure, indeed he is. If you knew all, you would not doubt it. He was ever faithful, indeed, indeed he was. Once you liked him. Speak kindly of him, father. He is the victim. If you meet him, be gentle to him, sir, for indeed, if you knew all, you would pity him." End of Book 6, Chapter 16.
Book 6, Chapter 17 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Book 6, Chapter 17, in which Ferdinand has a very stormy interview with his father. If we pause now to take a calm and comprehensive review of the state and prospects of the three families in whose feelings and fortunes we have attempted to interest the reader, it must be confessed that, however brilliant and satisfactory they might appear on the surface, the elements of discord, gloom, and unhappiness might be more profoundly discovered, and might even be held as rapidly stirring into movement. Miss Temple was the affianced bride of Lord Montfort, but her heart was Captain Armine's. Captain Armine, in the estimation of his parents, was the pledged husband of Miss Grandison, while he and his cousin had, in fact, dissolved their engagement. Mr. Temple more than suspected his daughter's partiality for Ferdinand. Sir Ratcliffe, very much surprised at seeing so little of his son, and resolved that the marriage should be no further delayed, was about to precipitate confessions, of which he did not dream, and which were to shipwreck all the hopes of his life. The Count Mirabel and Miss Grandison were both engaged in an active conspiracy. Lord Montfort alone was calm, and if he had a purpose to conceal, inscrutable. All things, however, foreboded a crisis. Sir Ratcliffe, astonished at the marked manner in which his son absented himself from Brook Street, resolved upon bringing him to an explanation. At first he thought there might be some lovers' quarrel, but the demeanour of Katherine, and the easy tone in which she ever spoke of her cousin, soon disabused him of this fond hope. He consulted his wife. Now, to tell the truth, Lady Armine, who was a shrewd woman, was not without her doubts and perplexities, but she would not confess them to her husband. Many circumstances had been observed by her which filled her with disquietude, but she had staked all her hopes upon this cast, and she was of a sanguine temper. She was leading an agreeable life. Katherine appeared daily more attached to her, and Lady Armine was quite of opinion that it is always very injudicious to interfere. She endeavoured to persuade Sir Ratcliffe that everything was quite right, and she assured him that the season would terminate, as all seasons ought to terminate, by the marriage. And perhaps Sir Ratcliffe would have followed her example, only it so happened that as he was returning home one evening he met his son in Grosvenor Square. "Why, Ferdinand, we never see you now," said Sir Ratcliffe. "Oh, you are all so gay," said Ferdinand. "How is my mother?" "She is well. Catherine and herself have gone to see the balloon, with Sir Montfort and Count Mirabel. Come in," said Sir Ratcliffe, for he was now almost at his door. The father and son entered. Sir Ratcliffe walked into a little library on the ground floor, which was his morning room. "We dine at home to-day, Ferdinand," said Sir Ratcliffe. "Perhaps you will come." "Thank you, sir. I am engaged." "It seems to me you are always engaged. For a person who does not like gaiety, it is very odd." "Hi ho!" said Ferdinand. "How do you like your new horse, sir?" "Ferdinand, I wish to speak a word to you," said Sir Ratcliffe. "I do not like ever to interfere unnecessarily with your conduct, but the anxiety of a parent will, I think, excuse the question I am about to ask. When do you propose being married?" "Oh, I do not know exactly." "Your grandfather has been dead now, you know, much more than a year. I cannot help thinking your conduct singular. There is nothing wrong between you and Catherine, is there?" "Wrong, sir?" "Yes, wrong. I mean, is there any misunderstanding? Have you quarrelled?" "No, sir, we have not quarrelled. We perfectly understand each other." "I am glad to hear it, for I must say I think your conduct is very unlike that of a lover. All I can say is, I did not win your mother's heart by such proceedings." "Catherine has made no complaint of me, sir." "Certainly not, and that surprises me still more." Ferdinand seemed plunged in thought. The silence lasted some minutes. Sir Ratcliffe took up the newspaper, his son leant over the mantelpiece and gazed upon the empty fireplace. At length he turned round and said, "Father, I can bear this no longer. The engagement between Catherine and myself is dissolved." "Good God! When and why?" exclaimed Sir Ratcliffe, the newspaper falling from his hand. "Long since, sir. Ever since I loved another woman, and she knew it." "Ferdinand! Ferdinand!" exclaimed the unhappy father, but he was so overpowered that he could not give utterance to his thoughts. He threw himself in a chair and wrung his hands. Ferdinand stood still and silent, like a statue of destiny, gloomy and inflexible. "Speak again," at length said Sir Ratcliffe. "Let me hear you speak again. I cannot believe what I have heard. Is it true indeed that your engagement with your cousin has been long terminated?" Ferdinand nodded assent. "Your poor mother!" exclaimed Sir Ratcliffe. "This will kill her." He rose from his seat and walked up and down the room in great agitation. "I knew all was not right," he muttered to himself. "She will sink under it. We must all sink under it. Madman, you know not what you have done." "It is in vain to regret, sir. My sufferings have been greater than yours." "She will pardon you, my boy," said Sir Ratcliffe, in a quicker and kinder tone. "You have lived to repent your impetuous folly. Catherine is kind and generous. She loves us all. She must love you. She will pardon you. Yes, entreat her to forget it. Your mother has great influence with her. She will exercise it. She will interfere. You are very young. All will yet be well." "It is as impossible for me to marry Catherine Grandison as for you yourself to do it, sir," said Ferdinand in a tone of calmness. "You are not married to another?" "In faith, I am bound by a tie which I can never break." "And who is this person?" "She must be nameless, for many reasons." "Ferdinand," said Sir Ratcliffe, "you know not what you are doing. My life, your mother's, the existence of our family, hang upon your conduct. Yet there is time to prevent this desolation. I am controlling my emotions. I wish you to save us, you all. Throw yourself at your cousin's feet. She is soft-hearted. She may yet be yours." "Dear father, it cannot be." Then, welcome ruin!" exclaimed Sir Ratcliffe in a hoarse voice. "And," he continued, pausing between every word from the difficulty of utterance, "if the conviction that you have destroyed all our hopes, rewarded us for all our affection, our long devotion, by blasting every fond idea that has ever illumined our sad lives, that I and Constance, poor fools, have clung and clung to, if this conviction can console you, sir, enjoy it. Ferdinand, my son, my child, that I have never spoken an unkind word to, that never gave me cause to blame or check him. Your mother will be home soon. Your poor, poor mother. Do not let me welcome her with all this misery. Tell me it is not true. Recall what you have said. Let us forget these harsh words. Reconcile yourself to your cousin. Let us be happy. Father, if my heart's blood could secure your happiness, my life were ready. But this I cannot do. Do you know what is at stake? Everything. All. We can see Armine no more. Our home is gone. Your mother and myself must be exiles. Oh, you have not thought of this. Say you have not thought of this. Ferdinand hid his face. His father, emboldened, urged the fond plea. You will save us, Ferdinand. You will be our preserver. It is all forgotten, is it not? It is a lover's quarrel, after all. Father, why should I trifle with your feelings? Why should I feign what can never be? This sharp interview, so long postponed, ought not now to be adjourned. Indulge no hopes, for there are none. Then, by every sacred power, I revoke every blessing that since your birth I have poured upon your head. I recall the prayers that every night I have invoked upon your being. Great God, I cancel them. You have betrayed your cousin. You have deserted your mother and myself. You have first sullied the honor of our home, and now you have destroyed it. Why were you born? What have we done that your mother's womb should produce such a curse? Sins of my father, they are visited upon me. And Glastonbury, what will Glastonbury say? Glastonbury, who sacrificed his fortune for you. Mr. Glastonbury knows all, sir, and has always been my confidant. Is he a traitor? For when a son deserts me, I know not whom to trust. He has no thoughts but for our welfare, sir. He will convince you, sir, I cannot marry my cousin. Boy, you know not what you say. Not marry your cousin? Then let us die. It were better for us all to die. My father, be calm, I beseech you. You have spoken harsh words. I have not deserted you or my mother. I never will. If I have wronged my cousin, I have severely suffered, and she has most freely forgiven me. She is my dear friend. As for our house, tell me, would you have had that house preserved at the cost of my happiness? You are not the father I supposed, if such indeed be your wish. Happiness? Fortune, family, beauty, youth, a sweet and charming spirit, if these will not secure a man's happiness, I know not what might, and these I wished you to possess. Sir, it is in vain for us to converse upon this subject. See Glastonbury, if you will. He can at least assure you that neither my feelings are light, nor my conduct hasty. I will leave you now. Ferdinand quitted the room. Sir Ratcliffe did not notice his departure, although he was not unaware of it. He heaved a deep sigh, and was apparently plunged in profound thought. End of Book 6, Chapter 17. Recording by Todd. Book 6, Chapter 18 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 18. Ferdinand is arrested by Messrs. Morris and Levison and taken to a sponging house. It must be confessed that the affairs of our friends were in a critical state. Every one interested felt that something decisive in their respective fortunes was at hand. And yet, so vain are all human plans and calculations, that the unavoidable crisis was brought about by an incident which no one anticipated. It so happened that the stormy interview between Sir Ratcliffe and his son was overheard by a servant. This servant, who had been engaged by Miss Grandison in London, was a member of a club to which a confidential clerk of Messrs. Morris and Levison belonged. In the ensuing evening, when this worthy knight of the shoulder-knot just dropped out for an hour to look in at this choice society, smoke a pipe, and talk over the affairs of his mistress and the nation, he announced the important fact that the match between Miss Grandison and Captain Armine was no go, which, for his part, he did not regret, as he thought his mistress ought to look higher. The confidential clerk of Messrs. Morrison and Levison listened in silence to this important intelligence, and communicated it the next morning to his employers. And so it happened that a very few days afterwards, as Ferdinand was lying in bed at his hotel, the door of his chamber suddenly opened, and an individual, not of the most prepossessing appearance, being much marked with smallpox, reeking with gin, and wearing top boots and a belcher handkerchief, rushed into his room and inquired whether he were Captain Armine. "The same," said Ferdinand. "And pray, sir, who are you?" "Don't wish to be unpleasant," was the answer, "but, sir, you are my prisoner." There is something exceedingly ignoble in an arrest. Ferdinand felt that sickness come over him which the uninitiated in such ceremonies must experience. However, he rallied, and inquired at whose suit these proceedings were taken. "Messrs. Morris and Levison, sir." "Cannot I send for my lawyer and give bail?" The bailiff shook his head. "You see, sir, you are taken in execution, so it is impossible." "And the amount of the debt?" "Is £2800, sir." "Well, what am I to do?" "Why, sir, you must go along with us." "We will do it very quietly. My follower is in a hackney coach at the door, sir. You can just step in as pleasantly as possible. I suppose you would like to go to a house, and then you can send for your friends, you know." "Well, if you will go downstairs, I will come to you." The bailiff grinned. "Can't let you out of my sight, sir." "Why, I cannot dress if you are here." The bailiff examined the room to see if there were any mode of escape. There was no door but the entrance. The window offered no chance. "Well, sir," he said, "I likes to do things pleasant. I can stand outside, sir, but you must be quick." Ferdinand rang for his servant. When Louis quickly understood the state of affairs, he was anxious to throw the bailiff out the window, but his master prevented him. Mr. Glastonbury had gone out some 2 hours. Ferdinand sent Louis with a message to his family to say he was about leaving town for a few days, and impressing upon him to be careful not to let them know in Brook Street what had occurred. He completed his rapid toilette, and accompanied the sheriff's officer to the hackney coach that was prepared for him. As they jogged on in silence, Ferdinand revolved in his mind how it would be most advisable for him to act. Any application to his own lawyer was out of the question. That had been tried before, and he felt assured that there was not the slightest chance of that gentleman discharging so large a sum, especially when he was aware that it was only a portion of his client's liabilities. He thought of applying for advice to Count Mirabel or Lord Catchimwhocan, but with what view? He would not borrow the money of them, even if they would lend it, and, as it was, he bitterly reproached himself for having availed himself so easily of Mr. Bond Sharpe's kind offices. At this moment he could not persuade himself that his conduct had been strictly honourable to that gentleman. He had not been frank in the exposition of his situation. The money had been advanced under a false impression, if not absolutely borrowed under a false pretence. He cursed Catchimwhocan and his levity. The honour of the Armines was gone, like everything else that once belonged to him. The result of Ferdinand's reflections was, that he was utterly done up, that no hope or chance of succour remained for him, that his career was closed, and not daring to contemplate what the consequences might be to his miserable parents, he made a desperate effort to command his feelings. Here the coach turned up a dingy street, leading out of the lower end of Oxford Street, and stopped before a large but gloomy dwelling, which Ferdinand's companion informed him was a sponging house. "I suppose you would like to have a private room, sir? You can have every accommodation here, sir, and feel quite at home, I assure you." In pursuance of this suggestion, Captain Armine was ushered into the best drawing room, with barred windows, and treated in the most aristocratic manner. It was evidently the chamber reserved only for unfortunate gentlemen of the utmost distinction. It was amply furnished with a mirror, a loo table, and a very hard sofa. The walls were hung with old-fashioned caricatures by Bunbury. The fire-irons were of polished brass. Over the mantelpiece was the portrait of the master of the house, which was evidently a speaking likeness, and in which Captain Armine fancied he traced no slight resemblance to his friend Mr. Levison. And there were also some sources of literary amusement in the room, in the shape of a Hebrew Bible and the racing calendar. After walking up and down the room for an hour, meditating over the past, for it seemed hopeless to trouble himself any further for the future, Ferdinand began to feel faint, for it may be recollected that he had not even breakfasted. So, pulling the bell rope with such force that it fell to the ground, a funny little waiter immediately appeared, awed by the sovereign ring, and having, indeed, received private intelligence from the bailiff that the gentleman in the drawing-room was a regular nob. And here, perhaps, I should remind the reader that of all the great distinctions in life, none perhaps is more important than that which divides mankind into the two great sections of nobs and snobs. It might seem at the first glance that if there were a place in the world which should level all distinctions, it would be a debtor's prison. But this would be quite an error. Almost at the very moment that Captain Armine arrived at his sorrowful hotel, A tradesman who had been arrested for £50 and torn from his wife and family had been forced to repair to the same asylum. He was introduced into what is styled the coffee room, being a long, low, unfurnished, sanded chamber, with a table and benches, and being very anxious to communicate with some friend, in order, if possible, to effect his release, and prevent himself from being a bankrupt, he had continued meekly to ring at intervals for the last half hour in order that he might write and forward his letter. The waiter heard the coffee room bell ring, but never dreamed of noticing it, though the moment the signal of the private room sounded, and sounded with so much emphasis, he rushed upstairs, 3 steps at a time, and instantly appeared before our hero. And all this difference was occasioned by the simple circumstance that Captain Armine was a nob, and the poor tradesman a snob. "I am hungry," said Ferdinand. "Can I get anything to eat at this damned place?" "What would you like, sir?" "Anything you choose, sir. Mutton chop, rump steak, veal cutlet. Do your fowl in a quarter of an hour. Roast or boiled, sir?" "I have not breakfasted yet. Bring me some breakfast." "Yes, sir," said the little waiter. "Tea, sir? Coffee, eggs, toast, buttered toast, sir? Like any meat, sir? Ham, sir? Tongue, sir? Like a devil, sir?" "Anything, everything. Only be quick." "Yes, sir," responded the waiter. "Beg pardon, sir. No offence, I hope, but custom to pay here, sir. Shall be happy to accommodate you, sir. Know what a gentleman is." "Thank you, I will not trouble you," said Ferdinand. "Give me that note changed." "Yes, sir," replied the little waiter, bowing very low as he disappeared. "Gentleman in best drawing room wants breakfast. Gentleman in best drawing room wants change for a £10 note. Breakfast immediately for gentleman in best drawing room. Tea, coffee, toast, ham, tongue, and a devil. A regular nob." Ferdinand was so exhausted that he had postponed all deliberation as to his situation until he had breakfasted, and, when he had breakfasted, he felt dull. It is the consequence of all meals. In whatever light he viewed his affairs, they seemed inextricable. He was now in a sponging house. He could not long remain here. He must be soon in a jail. A jail! What a bitter termination of all his great plans and hopes! What a situation for one who had been betrothed to Henrietta Temple! He thought of his cousin. He thought of her great fortune, which might have been his. Perhaps at this moment they were all riding together in the park. In a few days all must be known to his father. He did not doubt of the result. Armine would immediately be sold, and his father and mother, with the wretched wreck of their fortune, would retire to the Continent. What a sad vicissitude! And he had done it all. He, their only child, their only hope, on whose image they had lived, who was to restore the house. He looked at the bars of his windows. It was a dreadful sight. His poor mother, his fond mother, he was quite sure their hearts would break. They never could survive all this misery, this bitter disappointment of all their hopes. Little less than a year ago when he was at Bath, and they were all joy and triumph. What a wild scene had his life been since! Oh, Henrietta, why did we ever meet? That fatal, fatal morning! The cedar tree rose before him, he recalled. He remembered everything. And poor Glastonbury! It was a miserable end. He could not disguise it from himself. He had been most imprudent. He had been mad. And yet so near happiness. Perfect, perfect happiness. Henrietta might have been his, and they might have been so happy. This confinement was dreadful. It began to press upon his nerves. No occupation, not the slightest resource. He took up the racing calendar. He threw it down again. He knew all the caricatures by heart. They infinitely disgusted him. He walked up and down the room till he was so tired that he flung himself upon the hard sofa. It was intolerable. A jail must be preferable to this. There must be some kind of wretched amusement in a jail. But this ignoble, this humiliating solitude! He was confident he would go mad if he remained here. He rang the bell again. "Yes, sir," said the little waiter. "This place is intolerable to me," said Captain Armine. "I am really quite sick of it. What can I do?" The waiter looked a little perplexed. "I should like to go to jail at once," said Ferdinand. "Lord, sir!" said the little waiter. "Yes, I cannot bear this," he continued. "I shall go mad. Don't you think your friends will call soon, sir?" "I have no friends," said Ferdinand. "I hope nobody will call." "No friends!" said the little waiter, who began to think Ferdinand was not such a nob as he had imagined. "Why, if you have no friends, sir, it would be best to go to the Fleet, I think." "By Jove, I think it would be better. Master thinks your friends will call, I'm sure." "Nobody knows I am here," said Ferdinand. "Oh!" said the little waiter. "You want to let them know, do you, sir?" Anything sooner. I wish to conceal my disgrace." "Oh, sir, you are not used to it. I dare say you were never nabbed before?" "Certainly not." "There it is. If you will be patient, you will see everything go well." "Never, my good fellow. Nothing can go well." "Oh, sir, you are not used to it. A regular nob like you, nabbed for the first time, and for such a long figure, sir, sure not to be diddled. Never knowed such a thing yet. Friends sure to stump down, sir." "The greater the claim, the more difficulty in satisfying it, I should think," said Ferdinand. "Lord, no, sir. You are not used to it. It is only poor devils nabbed for their 50s and 100s that are ever done up. A nob was never nabbed for the sum that you are, sir, and ever went to the wall. Trust my experience. I never knowed such a thing." Ferdinand could scarcely refrain from a smile. Even the conversation of the little waiter was a relief to him. "You see, sir," continued that worthy, "Morrison and Levison would never have given you such a deuce of a tick unless they knowed your resources. Trust Morrison and Levison for that. You done up, sir, a nob like you, that Morrison and Levison have trusted for such a tick. Lord, sir, you don't know nothing about it. I could afford to give them 15 shillings in the pound for their debt myself, and a good day's business too. Friends will stump down, sir, trust me." "Well, it is some satisfaction for me to know that they will not, and that Morris and Levison will not get a farthing." "Well, sir," said the incredulous little functionary, "when I find Morrison and Levison lose 2 or 3,000 pounds by a nob who was nabbed for the first time, I will pay the money myself. That is all I know." Here the waiter was obliged to leave Ferdinand, but he proved his confidence in that gentleman's fortunes by his continued civility, and in the course of the day brought him a stale newspaper. It seemed to Ferdinand that the day would never close. The waiter pestered him about dinner, eulogizing the cook, and assured him that his master was famous for champagne. Although he had no appetite, Ferdinand ordered dinner in order to assure the occurrence of one incident. The champagne made him drowsy. He was shown to his room, and for a while he forgot his cares in sleep. End of Book 6, Chapter 18. Recording by Todd.
Book 6, Chapter 19 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynne Thompson. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 19. The crisis rapidly advances. Henrietta Temple began once more to droop. This change was not unnoticed by her constant companion, Lord Montfort, and yet he never permitted her to be aware of his observation. All that he did was still more to study her amusement, if possible to be still more considerate and tender. Miss Grandison, however, was far less delicate. She omitted no opportunity of letting Miss Temple know that she thought that Henrietta was very unwell, and that she was quite convinced Henrietta was thinking of Ferdinand. Nay, she was not satisfied to confine these intimations to Miss Temple. She impressed her conviction of Henrietta's indisposition on Lord Montfort, and teased him with asking his opinion of the cause. "What do you think is the cause, Miss Grandison?" said his lordship very quietly. "Perhaps London does not agree with her. But then, when she was ill before, she was in the country. But it seemed to me to be the same illness. I wonder you do not notice it, Lord Montfort. A lover to be so insensible, I am surprised." "It is useless to notice that which you cannot remedy." "Why do you not call in those who can offer remedies?" said Miss Grandison. "Why not send for Sir Henry?" "I think it best to leave Henrietta alone," said Lord Montfort. "Do you think it is in the mind, then?" said Miss Grandison. "It may be," said Lord Montfort. "It may be! Upon my word, you are very easy." "I am not indifferent, Miss Grandison. There is nothing that I would not do for Henrietta's welfare." "Oh, yes, there is something," said Miss Grandison, rather maliciously. "You are really an extraordinary person, Miss Grandison," said Lord Montfort. "What can you mean by so strange an observation?" "I have my meaning, but I suppose I may have a mystery as well as anybody else." "A mystery, Miss Grandison?" "Yes, a mystery, Lord Montfort. There is not a single individual in the 3 families who has not a mystery, except myself. But I have found out something. I feel quite easy now. We are all upon an equality." "You are a strange person." "It may be so, but I am happy, for I have nothing on my mind. Now that poor Ferdinand has told Sir Ratcliffe we are not going to marry, I have no part to play. I hate deception. It is almost as bitter as marrying one who is in love with another person." "That must be bitter indeed. And is that the reason that you do not marry your cousin?" inquired Lord Montfort. "I may be in love with another person, or I may not," said Miss Grandison. "But, however that may be, the moment Ferdinand very candidly told me he was, we decided not to marry. I think we were wise. Do not you, Lord Montfort?" "If you are happy, you are wise," said Lord Montfort. "Yes, I am pretty happy, as happy as I can well be when all my best friends are miserable." "Are they?" "I think so. My aunt is in tears, my uncle in despair, Ferdinand meditates suicide, Henrietta is pining away, and you, who are the philosopher of the society, you look rather grave. I fancy I think we are a most miserable set." "I wish we could all be happy," said Lord Montfort. "And so we might, I think," said Miss Grandison; "at least some of us." "Make us, then," said Lord Montfort. "I cannot make you." "I think you could, Miss Grandison." At this moment Henrietta entered, and the conversation assumed a different turn. "Will you go with us to Lady Bellair's, Kate?" said Miss Temple. "The Duchess has asked me to call there this morning." Miss Grandison expressed her willingness. The carriage was waiting, and Lord Montfort offered to attend them. At this moment the servant entered with a note for Miss Grandison. "From Glastonbury," she said. "Dear Henrietta, he wishes to see me immediately." "What can it be?" "Go to Lady Bellair's, and call for me on your return. You must indeed, and then we can all go out together." And so it was arranged. Miss Temple, accompanied by Lord Montfort, proceeded to Bellair House. "Don't come near me," said the old lady when she saw them. "Don't come near me. I am in despair. I do not know what I shall do. I think I shall sell all my china. Do you know anybody who wants to buy old china? They shall have it a bargain. But I must have ready money. Ready money I must have. Do not sit down in that chair. It is only made to look at. Oh, if I were rich like you! I wonder if my china is worth £300. I could cry my eyes out, that I could. The wicked men! I should like to tear them to pieces. Why is he not in Parliament? And then they could not take him up. They never could arrest Charles Fox. I have known him in as much trouble as anyone. Once he sent all his furniture to my house from his lodgings. He lodged in Berry Street. I always look at the house when I pass by. Don't fiddle the pens. I hate people who fiddle. Where is Gregory? Where is my bell? Where is the page? Naughty boy, why do you not come? There, I do not want anything. I do not know what to do. The wicked men. The greatest favourite I had. He was so charming. Charming people are never rich. He always looked melancholy. I think I will send to the rich man I dine with, but I forget his name. Why do you not tell me his name?" "My dear Lady Bellair, what is the matter? Don't ask me, don't speak to me. I tell you I am in despair. Oh, if I were rich, how I would punish those wicked men!" "Can I do anything?" asked Lord Montfort. "I do not know what you can do. I have got the tic. I always have the tic when my friends are in trouble." "Who is in trouble, Lady Bellair?" "My dearest friend, the only friend I care about. How can you be so hard-hearted? I called upon him this morning, and his servant was crying. I must get him a place. He is such a good man, and loves his master. Now, do you want a servant? You never want anything. Ask everybody you know whether they want a servant, an honest man who loves his master. There he is crying downstairs in Gregory's room. Poor good creature, I could cry myself, only it is of no use." "Who is the master?" asked Lord Montfort. "Nobody you know. Yes, you know him very well. It is my dear, dear friend. You know him very well. The bailiffs went to his hotel yesterday, and dragged him out of bed, and took him to prison. Oh, I shall go quite distracted. I want to sell my china to pay his debts. Where is Miss Twoshoes?" continued her ladyship. Why don't you answer? You do everything to plague me." "Miss Grandison, Lady Bellair? To be sure, it is her lover." "Captain Armine? Have I not been telling you all this time? They have taken him to prison." Miss Temple rose and left the room. "Poor creature, she is quite shocked. She knows him too," said her ladyship. "I am afraid he is quite ruined. There is a knock. I will make a subscription for him. I dare say it is my grandson. He is very rich and very good natured." "My dear Lady Bellair," said Lord Montfort, rising, "favour me by not saying a word to anybody at present. I will just go in the next room to Henrietta. She is intimate with the family, and much affected. Now, my dear lady, I entreat you," continued his lordship, "do not say a word. Captain Armine has good friends, but do not speak to strangers. It will do harm. It will indeed." "You are a good creature. You are a good creature. Go away." "Lady Frederick Berrington, my lady," announced the page. "She is very witty, but very poor. It is no use speaking to her. I won't say a word. Go to Miss Thingabob. Go, go." And Lord Montfort escaped into the saloon as Lady Frederick entered. Henrietta was lying on the sofa. Her countenance was hid. She was sobbing convulsively. "Henrietta," said Lord Montfort, but she did not answer. "Henrietta," he again said, "dear Henrietta, I will do whatever you wish." "Save him, save him!" she exclaimed. "Oh, you cannot save him, and I have brought him to this. Ferdinand, dearest Ferdinand, oh, I shall die." "For God's sake be calm," said Lord Montfort. "There is nothing I will not do for you, for him." "Ferdinand, Ferdinand, my own Ferdinand. Oh, why did we ever part? Why was I so unjust, so wicked? And he was so true. I cannot survive his disgrace and misery. I wish to die." "There shall be no disgrace, no misery," said Lord Montfort. "Only for God's sake be calm. There is a chattering woman in the next room. Hush, hush! I tell you I will do everything." "You cannot, you must not, you ought not. Kind, generous Digby, pardon what I have said, forget it. But indeed I am so wretched, I can bear this life no longer." "But you shall not be wretched, Henrietta. You shall be happy. Everybody shall be happy. I am Armine's friend. I am indeed. I will prove it. On my honour, I will prove that I am his best friend." "You must not. You are the last person. You are indeed. He is so proud. Anything from us will be death to him. Yes, I know him. He will die sooner than be under an obligation to either of us." "You shall place him under still greater obligations than this," said Lord Montfort. "Yes, Henrietta, if he has been true to you, you shall not be false to him." "Digby, Digby, speak not such strange words. I am myself again. I left you that I might be alone. Best and most generous of men, I have never deceived you. Pardon the emotions that even you were not to witness. Take my arm, dearest. Let us walk into the garden. I wish to speak to you. Do not tremble. I have nothing to say that is not for your happiness. At all times and under all circumstances the great object of my thoughts." He raised Miss Temple gently from the sofa, and they walked away far from the observation of Lady Bellair, or the auricular powers, though they were not inconsiderable, of her lively guest. End of Book 6, Chapter 19.
Book 6, Chapter 20 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 20, in which Ferdinand receives more than one visit and finds that adversity has not quite deprived him of his friends. In the meantime, morning broke upon the unfortunate Ferdinand. He had forgotten his cares in sleep, and, when he woke, it was with some difficulty that he recalled the unlucky incident of yesterday, and could satisfy himself that he was indeed a prisoner. But the bars of his bedroom windows left him not very long in pleasing doubt. His friend, the little waiter, soon made his appearance. "Sleep pretty well, sir?" Same breakfast as yesterday, sir? Tongue and ham, sir? Perhaps you would like a kidney instead of a devil? It will be a change." "I have no appetite." "It will come, sir. You ain't used to it. Nothing else to do here but eat. Better try the kidney, sir. Is there anything you fancy?" "I have made up my mind to go to jail to-day." "Lord, sir, don't think of it. Something will turn up, sir, take my word." And, sooth to say, the experienced waiter was not wrong. For bringing in the breakfast, followed by an underling with a great pomp of plated covers, he informed Ferdinand, with a chuckle, that a gentleman was inquiring for him. "Told you your friends would come, sir." The gentleman was introduced, and Ferdinand beheld Mr. Glastonbury. "My dear Glastonbury," said Ferdinand, scarcely daring to meet his glance, "this is very kind, and yet I wish to have saved you this." "My poor child," said Glastonbury. "Oh, my dear friend, it is all over. This is a more bitter moment for you even than for me, kind friend. This is a terrible termination of all your zeal and labours." "Nay," said Glastonbury, "let us not think of anything but the present. For what are you being held in durance? My dear Glastonbury, if it were only £10 I could not permit you to pay it. So let us not talk of that. This must have happened sooner or later. It has come, and come unexpectedly, but it must be borne like all other calamities." "But you have friends, my Ferdinand." "Would that I had not! All that I wish now is that I were alone in the world. If I could hope that my parents would leave me to myself, I should be comparatively easy. But when I think of them, and the injury I must do them, it is hell. It is hell." "I wish you would tell me your exact situation," said Mr. Glastonbury. "Do not talk of it. Does my father know of this?" "Not yet." "'Tis well. He may yet have a happy day. He will sell Armine." Glastonbury shook his head and sighed. "Is it so bad?" he said. "My dearest friend, if you will know the worst, take it. I am here for nearly £3,000, and I owe at least 10 more." "And they will not take bail?" "Not for this debt. They cannot. It is a judgment debt, the only one." "And they gave you no notice?" "None. They must have heard somehow or other that my infernal marriage was off. They have all waited for that. And now that you see that affairs are past remedy, let us talk of other topics, if you will be so kind as to remain half an hour in this dungeon. I shall quit it directly. I shall go to jail at once." Poor Glastonbury! He did not like to go, and yet it was a most melancholy visit. What could they converse about? Conversation, except on the interdicted subject of Ferdinand's affairs, seemed quite a mockery. At last Ferdinand said, "Dear Glastonbury, do not stay here. It only makes us both unhappy. Send Louis with some clothes for me, and some books. I will let you know before I leave this place. Upon reflection, I shall not do so for 2 or 3 days, if I can stay as long. See my lawyer. Not that he will do anything, nor can I expect him, but he may as well call and see me. Adieu, dear friend." Glastonbury was about to retire, when Ferdinand called him back. "This affair should be kept quiet," he said. "I told Louis to say I was out of town in Brook Street. I should be sorry were Miss Temple to hear of it, at least until after her marriage." Ferdinand was once more alone with the mirror, the loo table, the hard sofa, the caricatures which he hated even worse than his host's portrait, the Hebrew Bible, and the racing calendar. It seemed a year that he had been shut up in this apartment, instead of a day, he had grown so familiar with every object, and yet the visit of Glastonbury had been an event, and he could not refrain from pondering over it. A sponging house seemed such a strange, such an unnatural scene for such a character. Ferdinand recalled to his memory the tower at Armine, and all its glades and groves, shining in the summer sun, and freshened by the summer breeze. What a contrast to this dingy, confined, close dungeon! And was it possible that he had ever wandered at will in that fair scene with a companion fairer? Such thoughts might well drive a man mad. With all his errors, and all his disposition at present not to extenuate them, Ferdinand Armine could not refrain from esteeming himself unlucky. Perhaps it is more distressing to believe ourselves unfortunate than to recognise ourselves as imprudent. A fond mistress or a faithful friend, either of these are great blessings, and whatever may be one's scrapes in life, either of these may well be sources of consolation. Ferdinand had a fond mistress once, and had Henrietta Temple loved him, why, he might struggle with all these calamities. But that sweet dream was past. As for friends, he had none, At least he thought not. Not that he had to complain of human nature. He had experienced much kindness from mankind, and many were the services he had received from kind acquaintances. With the recollection of Ketch, to say nothing of Bond Sharp, and, above all, Count Mirabel, fresh in his mind, he could not complain of his companions. Glastonbury was indeed a friend, but Ferdinand sighed for a friend his own age, knit to him by the same tastes and sympathies, and capable of comprehending all his secret feelings. A friend who could even whisper hope, and smile in a sponging-house. The day wore away, the twilight shades were descending. Ferdinand became every moment more melancholy, when suddenly his constant ally, the waiter, rushed into the room. "My eye, sir! Here is a regular nob inquiring for you. I told you it would be all right." "Who is it?" "Here he is, coming up." Ferdinand caught the triumphant tones of Mirabel on the staircase. "Which is the room? Show me directly. Ah, Armine, mon ami, mon cher. Is this your friendship? To be in this cursed hole and not send for me? C'est une mauvaise plaisanterie to pretend we are friends. How are you, good fellow? Fine fellow, excellent Armine. If you were not here, I would quarrel with you. There, go away, man." The waiter disappeared, and Count Mirabel seated himself on the hard sofa. "My dear fellow," continued the Count, twirling the prettiest cane in the world, "this is a bêtise of you to be here and not send for me. Who has put you here?" "My dear Mirabel, it is all up." "Pah! How much is it?" "I tell you I am done up. It has got about that the marriage is off, and Morris and Levison have nabbed me for all the arrears of my cursed annuities." "But how much?" "Between 2,000 and 3,000. Count Mirabel gave a whistle. "I brought 500, which I have. We must get the rest somehow or other." "My dear Mirabel, you are the most generous fellow in the world, but I have troubled my friends too much. Nothing will induce me to take a sou from you. Besides, between ourselves, not my least mortification at this moment is some £1,500, which Bond Sharp let me have the other day for nothing, through Ketch. Pah! I am sorry about that, though, because he would have lent us this money. I will ask Biville." "I would sooner die." "I will ask him myself." "It is impossible." "We will arrange it. I tell you who will do it for us. He is a good fellow, and immensely rich. This is Fitzwilliam. He owes me great favours." "Dear Mirabel, I am delighted to see you. This is good and kind. I am so damned dull here. It quite gladdens me to see you, but do not talk about money." "Here is £500. 4 other fellows at £500. We can manage it. No more, no more, I beseech you." "But you cannot stop here. Quel drôle d'appartement! Before Charlie Doricourt was in Parliament he was always in this sort of houses, but I got him out somehow or other. I managed it. Once I bought of the fellow 500 dozen of champagne." "A new way to pay old debts, certainly," said Ferdinand. "I tell you, have you dined?" "I was going to, merely to have something to do." "I will stop and dine with you," said the Count, ringing the bell, "and we will talk over affairs. Laugh, my friend, laugh, my Armine. This is only a scene, this is life. What can we have for dinner, man? I shall dine here." "Gentleman's dinner is ordered, my lord, quite ready," said the waiter. "Champagne and ice, my lord?" "To be sure, everything that is good. Mon cher Armine, we shall have some fun." "Yes, my lord," said the waiter, running downstairs. "Dinner for best drawing room directly. Green pea soup, turbot, beefsteak, roast duck, and broiled chicken. Everything that is good. Champagne and ice, 2 regular knobs." The dinner soon appeared, and the two friends seated themselves. "Potage admirable," said Count Mirabel. "The best champagne I ever drank in my life. Mon brave, your health. This must be Charlie's man, by the wine. I think we will have him up. He will lend us some money. Finest turbot I ever ate. I will give you some of the fins. Ah, you are glad to see me, my Armine. You are glad to see your friend. Encore champagne. Good Armine, excellent Armine. Keep up your spirits. I will manage these fellows. You must take some beefsteak. The most tender beefsteak I ever tasted. This is a fine dinner. Encore un verre. Man, you may go. Don't wait." "By Jove, Mirabel, I never was so glad to see anybody in my life. Now you are a friend. I feel quite in spirits." "To be sure, always be in spirits. C'est une bêtise not to be in spirits. Everything is sure to go well. You will see how I will manage these fellows, and I will come and dine with you every day until you are out. You shall not be here at 8:40. As I go home I will stop at Mitchell's and get you a novel by Paul de Kock. Have you ever read Paul de Kock's books?" "Never," said Ferdinand. "What a fortunate man to be arrested! Now you can read Paul de Kock. By Jove, you are the most lucky fellow I know. You see, you thought yourself very miserable in being arrested. 'Tis the finest thing in the world, for now you will read Mon voisin Raymond. There are always two sides to a case." "I am content to believe myself very lucky in having such a friend as you," said Ferdinand. "But now, as these things are cleared away, let us talk over affairs. Have you seen Henrietta?" "Of course. I see her every day." "I hope she will not know of my crash until she is married." "She will not, unless you tell her." "And when do you think she will be married?" "When you please." "Cher ami, pour de la moquer." "By Jove, I am quite serious," exclaimed the Count. "I am as certain that you will marry her as that we are in this damned sponging house." "Nonsense." "The very finest sense in the world. If you will not marry her, I will myself, for I am resolved that good Montfort shall not. It shall never be said that I interfered without a result. Why, if she were to marry Montfort now, it would ruin my character. To marry Montfort after all my trouble, dining with that good Temple, and opening the mind of that little Grandison, and talking fine things to that good Duchess, it would be a failure." "What an odd fellow you are, Mirabel." "Of course. Would you have me like other people, and not odd? We will drink La Belle Henrietta. Fill up. You will be my friend when you are married, eh? Mon ami, excellent garçon. How we shall laugh some day, and when this dinner will be the best dinner we ever had." "But why do you think there was the slightest hope of Henrietta not marrying Montfort?" "Because my knowledge of human nature assures me that a young woman, very beautiful, very rich, with very high spirit, and an only daughter, will never go and marry one man when she is in love with another. And that other one, my dear fellow, like you. You are more sure of getting her because she is engaged." What a wonderful thing is a knowledge of human nature, thought Ferdinand to himself. The Count's knowledge of human nature is like my friend the waiter's experience. One assures me that I am certain to marry a woman because she is engaged to another person, and the other, that it is quite clear my debts will be paid because they are so large. The Count remained with his friend until 11 o'clock, when everybody was locked up. He invited himself to dine with him to-morrow, and promised that he should have a whole collection of French novels before he awoke. And assuring him over and over again that he looked upon him as the most fortunate of all his friends, and that if he broke the bank at Crocky's to-night, which he fancied he should, he would send him 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. At the same time he shook him heartily by the hand, and descended the staircase of the sponging house, humming Vive la Bagatelle. End of Book 6, Chapter 20. Recording by Todd.
Book 6, Chapter 21 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 21. The Crisis. Although when Ferdinand was once more left alone to his reflections, it did not appear to him that anything had occurred which should change his opinion of his forlorn lot, there was something, nevertheless, inspiring in the visit of his friend Count Mirabel. It did not seem to him, indeed, that he was the one with nearer extrication from his difficulties than before, and as for the wild hopes as to Henrietta, he dismissed them from his mind as the mere fantastic schemes of a sanguine spirit. And yet his gloom, by some process difficult to analyse, had in great measure departed. It would not be the champagne, nor that was a remedy he had previously tried. It was in some degree, doubtless, the magic sympathy of a joyous temperament, but chiefly it might perhaps be ascribed to the flattering conviction that he possessed the hearty friendship of a man whose goodwill was, in every view of the case, a very enviable possession. With such a friend as Mirabel, he could not deem himself quite so unlucky as in the morning. If he were fortunate, unfortunate so unexpectedly in this instance, he might be so in others. A vague presentiment that he had seen the worst of life came over him. It was equally in vain to justify the consoling conviction or to resist it. And Ferdinand Armine, although in a sponging house, fell asleep in better humour with his destiny than he had been over the last 8 months. His dreams were charming. He fancied that he was at Armine, standing by the barberry roastery. It was moonlight. It was perhaps a slight recollection of the night he had looked upon the garden from the window of his chamber, the night after he had first seen Henrietta. Suddenly, Henrietta Temple appeared at his window, and waved her hand to him with a smiling face. He immediately plucked for her a flower, and stood with his offering beneath her window. She was in a riding habit, and she told him that she had just returned from Italy. He invited her to descend, and she disappeared. But instead of Henrietta, there came forward from the old place the Duchess, who immediately inquired whether he had seen his cousin, and then her Grace, by some confused process common in dreams, turned into Glastonbury and pointed to the roastery, where, to his surprise, Catherine was talking with Lord Montfort. Ferdinand called out for Henrietta, but as she did not appear, he entered the place, where he found Count Mirabel dining by himself and just drinking a glass of champagne. He complained to Mirabel that Henrietta had disappeared, but his friend laughed at him, and said that after such a long ride, leaving Italy only yesterday, he could scarcely expect to see her. Satisfied with this explanation, Ferdinand joined the court at his banquet, and was awakened from his sleep and his dream apparently by Mirabel drawing a cork. Ah, why did he ever wake? It was so real. He had seen her so plainly. It was life. It was the very smile she wore at Ducie, that sunny glance, so full of joy, beauty, and love, which he could live to gaze on. And now he was in prison, and she was going to be married to another. Oh, there are things in this world that may well break hearts. The cork of Count Mirabel was, however, a substantial sound. A gentle tap at his door. He answered it, and the waiter entered his chamber. "Beg pardon, sir, for disturbing you. Only 8 o'clock." "Then why the deuce do you disturb me?" "There's been another nope, sir. I said as how you were not up, and he sent his compliments, and said as how he could call in an hour, as he wished to see you particular." "Was it the Count?" "No, sir, but it was a regular nope, sir, for he had a coronet on his cap, but he would not leave his name." "Catch, of course," thought Ferdinand to himself, "and sent by Mirabel. I should not wonder if, after all, they have broken the bank at Croquet's. Nothing shall induce me to take a ducat." However, Ferdinand thought fit to rise, and contrived to descend to the best drawing room about a quarter of an hour after the appointed time. To his extreme surprise, he found Lord Montfort. "My dear friend," said Lord Montfort, looking a little confused, "I am afraid I have sadly disturbed you, but I could not contrive to find you yesterday, until it was so late that I was ashamed to knock them up here, and I thought, therefore, you would excuse this early call, as I wish to see you very much indeed." "You're extremely kind," said Captain Armine, "but really I much regret that your lordship should have had all this trouble." "Oh, what is the trouble under such circumstances?" replied his lordship. "I cannot pardon myself for being so stupid as not reaching you yesterday. I never can excuse myself for the inconvenience you have experienced." Ferdinand bowed, but was so perplexed that he could not say a word. "I hope, my dear Armine," said his lordship, advancing rather slowly, putting his arm within that of Ferdinand, and then walking up and down the room together, "I hope you will act at this moment towards me as I would towards you, were our respective situations changed. Ferdinand bowed, but said nothing. Money, you know, my good fellow, continued Lord Montfort, is a disagreeable thing to talk about. But there are circumstances which should deprive such conversation between us of any awkwardness which otherwise might arise. I am not aware of them, my lord, said Ferdinand, though your good feelings command my gratitude. I think, upon reflection, we shall find that there are some, said Lord Montfort. For the moment, I will only hope that you will esteem those good feelings, and which, on my part, I am anxious should ripen into sincere and intimate friendship, as sufficient authority of my placing your affairs in general in that state that they may in future never deprive your family and friends of society necessary to their happiness. My lord, I am sure that adversity has assumed a graceful hue with me, for it has confirmed my most amiable views of human nature. I shall not attempt to express myself, which I feel towards your lordship for this generous goodness, but I will say I am profoundly impressed with it, not the less, because I cannot avail myself in the slightest degree of your offer. You are too much a man of the world, I am sure, my dear Armine, to be offended by my frankness. I shall, therefore, speak without fear of misconception. It does appear to me that the offer which I have made you is worthy of a little more consideration. You see, my dear friend, that you have placed yourself in such a situation that however you may act, the result cannot be completely satisfactory. The course you should pursue, therefore, as indeed all the contact in this world should be, is a matter of nice calculation. Have you well considered the consequences of your rushing upon ruin? In the first place, your family will receive a blow from which even future prosperity may not recover them. Your family estate, already in a delicate position, may be irrecoverably lost. The worldly consequences of such a vicissitude are very considerable. Whatever career you pursue, so long as you visibly possess Armine, you rank always among the aristocracy of the land, and a family that maintains such a position, however decayed, will ultimately recover. I hardly know an exception to this rule. I do not think of all men that you are most calculated to afford one. What you say has long pressed itself upon us, said Captain Armine. Then again, resumed Lord Montfort, the feelings and even interest of your friends are to be considered. Poor Glastonbury! I love that old man myself. The fall of Armine might break his heart. He would not like to leave his tower. You see, I know your place. Poor Glastonbury, said Ferdinand. But above all, continued Lord Montfort, the happiness, nay, the very health and life of your parents, for whom all this is now concealed, would perhaps be the last and the costliest sacrifices of your rashness. Ferdinand threw himself on the sofa and covered his face. Yet all this misery, all these misfortunes may be avoided, and you yourself become a calm and happy man by, for I wish not to understate your view of the subject, Armine, putting yourself under a pecuniary obligation to me, a circumstance to be avoided in the common course of life, no doubt, but is better to owe me a favour and save your family estate, preserve your position, maintain your friend, and prevent the misery and probable death of your parents, or be able to pass me in the street, in haughty silence if you please, with consciousness that the luxury of your pride has been satisfied at the cost of every circumstance which makes existence desirable. You put the case strongly, said Ferdinand, but no reasoning can ever persuade me that I am justified borrowing 3,000 pounds, which I can never repay. Accept it then. 'Tis the same thing, said Ferdinand. I think not, said Lord Montfort. But why do you say never? Because it is utterly impossible that I ever can. How do you know you may not marry a woman of large fortune? Said Lord Montfort. Now you seem to me exactly the sort of man who would marry an heiress. You are thinking of my cousin? Said Ferdinand. I thought that you had discovered, or that you might have learnt, and that there is no real intention of our union. No, I was not thinking of your cousin, said Lord Montfort, though, to tell you the truth, I was once in hopes that you would marry her. However, that I well know is entirely out of question, for I believe Miss Grandison will marry someone else." "Indeed!" exclaimed Ferdinand, little agitated. "Well, may she be happy. I love Kate from the bottom of my heart." "But who is the fortunate fellow?" "'Tis a lady's secret," said Lord Montfort. "But let's return to our agreement. To be brief, either, my dear Armine, you must be convinced by my reasoning, or I must remain here a prisoner like yourself. For to tell you the truth, there is a fair lady before whom I cannot present myself except in your company." Ferdinand changed countenance. There wanted but this to confirm his resolution, which had scarcely wavered, to owe his release to Henrietta's influence, which Lord Montfort was too degrading. "My lord," he said, "you touched upon a string that I hope might have been spared me. This conversation must indeed cease. My mouth is sealed from giving you the reasons, which nevertheless render it imperative on me to decline your generous offer." "Well, then," said Lord Montfort, "I must see if another can be more successful." And he held forth a note to the astounded Ferdinand, in Henrietta's writing. It dropped from Ferdinand's hand as he took it. Lord Montfort picked it up and gave it to him again, and walked to the other end of the room. It was with extreme difficulty that Ferdinand prevailed on himself to break the seal. The note was short. The hand that traced the letters must have trembled. Thus it ran: "Dearest Ferdinand, do everything that Digby wishes. He is our best friend. Digby is going to marry Catherine. Are you happy? Henrietta." Lord Montfort looked around. Ferdinand Armine was lying senseless on the sofa. Our friend was not of a swooning mood, but we think the circumstances may excuse the weakness. As for Lord Montfort, he rang the bell for the little waiter, who, the moment he saw what had occurred, hurried away and rushed upstairs again with cold water, a bottle of brandy, and a blazing sheet of brown paper, which he declared was an infallible specific. By some means or other, Ferdinand was in time recovered, and the little waiter was fairly expelled. "My dear friend," said Ferdinand in a faint voice, "I am the happiest man that ever lived. I hope you will be. I am sure you will be. Catherine is an angel. But I cannot speak. It is so strange." "My dear fellow, you really must take a glass of brandy," said Lord Montfort. "It is strange, certainly, but we are all happy." "I hardly know where I am," said Ferdinand, after a few minutes. "Am I really alive? Let us think how we are going to get out of this place. I suppose they will take my cheque. If not, I must be off." "Oh, don't go," said Ferdinand. "If you go, I shall not believe it is true, my dear Montfort." "Is it really true?" "Yes." "You see, my dear Armine," said Lord Montfort, smiling, "it was fated that I should marry a lady you rejected. And tell you the truth, the reason why I did not get to you yesterday, as I ought to have done, was an unexpected conversation I had with Miss Grandison. I think this arrest was a most fortunate incident. It brought affairs to a crisis. We should have gone on playing at cross purposes for ever." Here the little waiter entered again with a note and a packet. "The same messenger brought them," said Ferdinand. "No, sir. The Count's servant brought the note, and waits for an answer. The packet came by another person." Ferdinand opened the note and read as follows: "Berkeley Square, 7:30 morning. Mon ami, best joke in the world. I broke Croquet's bank 3 times. Of course, I told you so. I win £15,000. Directly I am awake I will send you the 3,000, and I will lend you the rest till your marriage. It will not be very long. I write this before I go to bed, that you may have it early. Adieu, cher ami. Votre affectionné, de Mirabel." "My arrest was certainly the luckiest incident in the world," said Ferdinand, handing the note to Lord Montfort. "Mirabel dined here yesterday, and went and paid on purpose to save me. I treat it as a joke, but what is this?" Ferdinand opened the packet. The handwriting was unknown to him. 10 bank notes of £300 each fell to the ground. Do I live in fairyland? He exclaimed. Now how can this be? It cannot be you, it cannot be Mirabel. It is wondrous strange. I think I can throw some light upon it, said Lord Montfort. Catherine was mysteriously engaged with Glastonbury yesterday morning. They were out together, and I know they went to her lawyer's. There is no doubt it is Catherine. I think, under the circumstances of the case, we need have no delicacy in availing ourselves of this fortunate remittance. It will at least save us time, said Lord Montfort, ringing the bell. Send your master here directly, he continued to the waiter. The sheriff's officer appeared. The debt, the fees, all were paid, and the discharge was duly taken. Ferdinand, in the meantime, went upstairs to lock up his dressing case. The little waiter rushed after him to pack his portmanteau. Ferdinand did not forget his zealous friend, who whispered hope when all was black. The little waiter chuckled as he put his 10 guineas in his pocket. You see, sir, he said, I was quite right. Knowed your friends would stump down. Fancy a nob like you sent to court. Fiddle-dee-dee. You see, sir, you weren't used to it. And so Ferdinand Armine bid adieu to the sponging house, where in the course of less than 48 hours he had known alike despair and rupture. Lord Montfort drove along with a gaiety unusual to him. Now, my dear Armine, he said, I am not a jot the less in love with Henrietta than before. I love her as you love Catherine. What folly to marry a woman who was in love with another person. I should have made her miserable, when the great object of all my conduct was to make her happy. Now Catherine really loves me, as much as Henrietta loves you. I have had this plan in my head for a long time. I calculated finely. I was convinced it was the only way to make us all happy. And now we shall all be related. We shall be constantly together, and we will be brother friends. Ah, my dear Montfort, said Ferdinand, what will Mr. Temple say? Leave him to me, said Lord Montfort. I tremble, said Ferdinand, if it were possible to anticipate difficulties today. I shall go to him at once, said Lord Montfort. I am not fond of suspense myself, and now it is of no use. All will be all right. I trust only to you, said Ferdinand, for I am as proud as Temple. He dislikes me, and he is too rich for me to bow down to him. I take it upon myself, said Lord Montfort. Mr. Temple is a calm, sensible man. You will laugh at me, but the truth is, with him it must be a matter of calculation. On the one hand, his daughter's happiness, a union with the family, second to none in blood, alliances, and territorial position, and only wanting his wealth to revive all its splendour. On the other, his daughter's broken-hearted, and a duke for his son-in-law. Mr. Temple is too sensible a man to hesitate, particularly when I remove the greatest difficulty he must experience. Where shall I out you down? Berkeley Square? End of Book 6, Chapter 21. Recording by Lambda.
Book 6, Chapter 22 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jill Engel. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 22. Ferdinand meditates over his good fortune. In moments of deep feeling, alike sudden bursts of prosperity, as in darker hours, man must be alone. It requires some self-communion to prepare ourselves for good fortune, as well as to encounter difficulty, and danger, and disgrace. This violent and triumphant revolution in his prospects and his fortunes was hardly yet completely comprehended by our friend Ferdinand Armine, and when he had left a note for the generous Mirabel, whose slumbers he would not disturb at this early hour, even with good news, he strolled along up Charles Street and to the Park, in one of those wild and joyous reveries in which we brood over coming bliss, and create 1,000 glorious consequences. It was one of those soft summer mornings which are so delightful in a great city. The sky was clear, the air was bland, the water sparkled in the sun, and the trees seemed doubly green and fresh to one who so recently had gazed only on iron bars. Ferdinand felt his freedom as well as his happiness. He seated himself on a bench and thought of Henrietta Temple. He took out her note and read it over and over again. It was indeed her handwriting. Restless with impending joy, he sauntered to the bridge and leant over the balustrade, gazing on the waters in charmed and charming vacancy. How many incidents, how many characters, how many feelings flitted over his memory! Of what sweet and bitter experience did he not chew the cud? 24 hours ago, and he deemed himself the most miserable and forlorn of human beings, and now all the blessings of the world seemed showered at his feet. A beautiful bride awaited him, whom he had loved with intense passion, and who he had thought but an hour ago was another's. A noble fortune, which would permit him to redeem his inheritance and rank him among the richest commoners of the realm, was to be controlled by one a few hours back a prisoner for desperate debts. The most gifted individuals in the land emulated each other in proving which entertained for him the most sincere affection. What man in the world had friends like Ferdinand Armine? Ferdinand Armine, who, 2 days back, deemed himself alone in the world. The unswerving devotion of Glastonbury, the delicate affection of his sweet cousin, all the magnanimity of the high-souled Montfort, and the generosity of the accomplished Mirabel, passed before him and wonderfully affected him. He could not flatter himself that he indeed merited such singular blessings, and yet with all his faults, which with him were but the consequences of his fiery youth, Ferdinand had been faithful to Henrietta. His constancy to her was now rewarded. As for his friends, the future must prove his gratitude to them. Ferdinand Armine had great tenderness of disposition, and somewhat of a meditative mind. Schooled by adversity, there was little doubt that his coming career would justify his favourable destiny. It was barely a year since he had returned from Malta, but what an eventful 12-month! Everything that had occurred previously seemed of another life. All his experience was concentrated in that wonderful drama that had commenced at Bath, the last scene of which was now approaching. The characters, his parents, Glastonbury, Catherine, Henrietta, Lord Montfort, Count Mirabel, himself, and Mr. Temple. Ah, that was a name that a little disturbed him, and yet he felt confidence now in Mirabel's prescience. He could not but believe that with time even Mr. Temple might be reconciled. It was at this moment that the sound of military music fell upon his ear. It recalled old days, parades and guards at Malta, times when he did not know Henrietta Temple, times when, as it seemed to him now, he had never paused to think or moralize. That was a mad life. What a Neapolitan ball was his career then! It was indeed dancing on a volcano, and now all had ended so happily. Oh, could it indeed be true? Was it not all a dream of his own creation, while his eye had been fixed in abstraction on that bright and flowing river? But then, there was Henrietta's letter. He might be enchanted, but that was the talisman. In the present unsettled, though hopeful, state of affairs, Ferdinand would not go home. He was resolved to avoid any explanations until he heard from Lord Montfort. He shrank from seeing Glastonbury or his cousin. As for Henrietta, it seemed to him that he never could have heart to meet her again, unless they were alone. Count Mirabel was the only person to whom he could abandon his soul, and Count Mirabel was still in his first sleep. So Ferdinand entered Kensington Gardens, and walked in those rich glades and stately avenues. It seems to the writer of this history that the inhabitants of London are scarcely sufficiently sensible of the beauties of its environs. On every side the most charming retreats open to them, nor is there a metropolis in the world surrounded by so many rural villages, picturesque parks, and elegant casinos. With the exception of Constantinople, there is no city in the world that can for a moment enter into competition with it. For himself, though in his time something of a rambler, He is not ashamed in this respect to confess a legitimate Cockney taste, and for his part he does not know where life can flow on more pleasantly than in sight of Kensington Gardens, viewing the silver Thames winding by the bowers of Rosebank, or inhaling from its terraces the refined air of graceful Richmond. In exactly 10 minutes it is in the power of every man to free himself from all the tumult of the world, the pangs of love, the throbs of ambition, the wear and tear of play, the recriminating boudoir, the conspiring club, the rattling hell, and find himself in a sublime sylvan solitude, superior to the cedars of Lebanon, and inferior only in extent to the chestnut forests of Anatolia. Kensington Gardens is almost the only place that has realized his idea of the forest of Spenser and Ariosto. What a pity that instead of a princess in distress, we meet only a nursery-maid. But here is the fitting and convenient locality to brood over our thoughts, to project the great, and to achieve the happy. It is here that we should get our speeches by heart, invent our impromptus, muse over the caprices of our mistresses, destroy a cabinet, and save a nation. About the time that Ferdinand directed his steps from these green retreats towards Berkeley Square, a servant summoned Miss Temple to her father. "Is papa alone?" inquired Miss Temple. "Only my lord with him," was the reply. "Is Lord Montfort here?" said Miss Temple, a little surprised. "My lord has been with the master these 3 hours," said the servant. End of Book 6, Chapter 22. Recording by Jill Ingle.
Book 6, Chapter 23 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tika Sabu. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Ferdinand Armine receives the most interesting invitation to dinner ever offered to him. "Is not it wonderful?" said Ferdinand, when he had finished his history to Count Marable. "Not the least," said the Count. "I never knew anything less surprising. 'Tis exactly what I said. 'Tis the most natural termination in the world." "Ah, my dear Marable, you are a prophet. What a lucky fellow I am to have such a friend as you." "To be sure you are. Take some more coffee?" "What are you going to do with yourself?" "I do not know what to do with myself. I really do not like to go anywhere until I've heard from Mountfort. I think I shall go to my hotel." "I will drive you. It is now 3 o'clock." But just at this moment Mr. Bevil called on the Count, and another hour disappeared. When they were fairly in the cabriolet, there were so many places to call at, and so many persons to see, that it was nearly 6 o'clock when they reached the hotel. Ferdinand ran upstairs to see if there were any letters from Lord Mountfort. He found his lordship's card, and also Mr. Temple's. They had called about half an hour ago. There was also a note. These were its contents: Grosvenor Square, Thursday. My dear Captain Armine, I have prepared myself with this note, as I feel I shall hardly be so fortunate to find you at home. It is only very recently that I have learned from Henrietta that you were in London, and I much regret to hear that you have been so great an invalid. It is so long since we met that I hope you will dine with us to-day, and indeed I am so anxious to see you, that I trust if you have unfortunately made any other engagement, you may yet contrive to gratify my request. It is merely a family party. You will only meet our friends from St. James's Square, and your own circle at Brook Street. I've asked no one else, save old Lady Bellair, and your friend Count Marable, and Henrietta is so anxious to secure his presence, that I shall be greatly obliged by your exerting your influence to induce him to accompany you, as I fear there is little hope of finding him free. Henrietta joins with me in kindest regards, and I beg you to believe me, my dear Captain Armine, most cordially yours, Pelham Temple. "What is the matter?" said the Count, when Ferdinand returned to the cabriolet with the note in his hand, and looked very agitated. "The stranger's note," said Ferdinand. "Give it me." "Do you call that strange? 'Tis the most regular epistle I ever read. I expected it. 'Tis an excellent fellow, that Mr. Temple. I will certainly dine with him, and send an excuse to the old castle-fish. A family party, all right, and he asks me. That is proper. I should not wonder if it ended by my being your trustee, or your executor, or your first Charles' godfather. Ah, that good Temple is a sensible man. I told you I would settle this business for you. You should hear me talk to that good Temple. I open his mind. A family party. It will be amusing. I would not miss it for £1,000. Besides, I must go to take care of you, for you will be committing all sorts of bêtises. I will give you one turn in the park. Jump in, mon enfant. Good Armine, excellent fellow, jump in. You see, I was right. I am always right. But I will confess to you a secret. I never was so right as I have been in the present case. 'Tis the best business that ever was. End of Book 6, Chapter 23. Recording by Tika Sabu.
Book 6, Chapter 24 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 24. Some account of the party and its result. In spite of the Count Mirabel's inspiring companionship, it must be confessed that Ferdinand's heart failed him when he entered Mr. Temple's house. Indeed, had it not been for the encouragement and jolly raillery of his light-hearted friend, it is not quite clear that he would have succeeded in ascending the staircase. A mist came over his vision as he entered the room. Various forms, indeed, glanced before him, but he could distinguish none. He felt so embarrassed that he was absolutely miserable. It was Mr. Temple's hand that he found he had hold of. The calm demeanour and bland tones of that gentleman somehow reassured him. Mr. Temple was cordial, and Count Mirabel hovered about Ferdinand and covered his confusion. Then he recognised the Duchess and his mother. They were sitting together, and he went up and saluted them. He dared not look round for the lady of the house. Lady Bellair was talking to his father. At last he heard his name called by the Count. "Armine, mon cher, see this beautiful work!" And Ferdinand advanced, or rather staggered, to a window, where stood the Count before a group, and in a minute he clasped the hand of Henrietta Temple. He could not speak. Catherine was sitting by her, and Lord Montfort sitting behind her chair. But Count Mirabel never ceased talking, and with so much art and tact that in a few moments he had succeeded in producing comparative ease on all sides. "I am so glad that you have come to-day," said Henrietta. Her eyes sparkled with a strange meaning, and then she suddenly withdrew her gaze. The rose of her cheek alternately glowed and faded. It was a moment of great embarrassment, and afterwards they often talked of it. Dinner, however, was soon announced as served, for Mirabel and Ferdinand had purposely arrived at the last moment. As the Duke advanced to offer his arm to Miss Temple, Henrietta presented Ferdinand with a flower, as if to console him for the separation. It was a round table. The Duchess and Lady Bellair sat on either side of Mr. Temple, the Duke on the right hand of Miss Temple. Where there were so many members of the same family, it was difficult to arrange the guests. Ferdinand held back when Count Mirabel, who had secured a seat by Henrietta, beckoned to Ferdinand, and, saying that Lady Bellair wished him to sit next to her, pushed Ferdinand, as he himself walked away, into the vacated seat. Henrietta caught the Count's eye as he moved off. It was a laughing eye. "I am glad you sit next to me," said Lady Bellair to the Count, "because you are famous. I love famous people, and you are very famous. Why don't you come and see me? Now I have caught you at last, and you shall come and dine with me the 7th, 8th, or 9th of next month. I have dinner parties every day. You shall dine with me on the 8th, for then Lady Frederick dines with me, and she will taste you. You shall sit next to Lady Frederick, and mind you flirt with her. I wonder if you are amusing as your grandfather. I remember dancing a minuet with him at Versailles 70 years ago." "It is well recollected in the family," said the Count. "Ah, you rogue!" said the little lady, chuckling. "You lie!" "I like a lie sometimes," she resumed, "but then it must be a good one. Do you know, I only say it to you, but I am half afraid lies are more amusing than truth." "Naturally," said the Count, "because truth must in general be commonplace, or it would not be true." In the meantime, Ferdinand was seated next to Henrietta Temple. He might be excused for feeling a little bewildered. Indeed, the wonderful events of the last 24 hours were enough to deprive anyone of a complete command over his senses. What marvel, then, that he nearly carved his soup, ate his fish with a spoon, and drank water instead of wine? In fact, he was labouring under a degree of nervous excitement which rendered it quite impossible for him to observe the proprieties of life. The presence of all these persons was insupportable to him. 5 minutes alone with her in the woods of Duchy, and he would have felt quite reassured. Miss Temple avoided his glance. She was, in truth, as agitated as himself, and talked almost entirely to the Duke. Yet sometimes she tried to address him, and say kind things. She called him Ferdinand, and that was quite sufficient to make him happy, although he felt very awkward. He had been seated some minutes before he observed that Glastonbury was next to him. "I am so nervous, dear Glastonbury," said Ferdinand, "that I do not think I shall be able to remain in the room." "I have heard something," said Glastonbury with a smile, "that makes me quite bold." "I cannot help fancying that it is all enchantment," said Ferdinand. "There is no wonder, my dear boy, that you are enchanted," said Glastonbury. "Ferdinand," said Miss Temple in a low voice, "papa is taking wine with you." Ferdinand looked up, and caught Mr. Temple's kind salute. "That was a fine horse you were riding to day," said Count Mirabel across the table to Miss Grandison. "Is it not pretty? It is Lord Montfort's." "Lord Montfort's!" thought Ferdinand. "How strange all this seems." "You were not of the riding party this morning," said his Grace to Henrietta. "I have not been very well this day or two," said Miss Temple. "Well, I think you are looking particularly well to day," replied the Duke. "What say you, Captain Armine?" Ferdinand blushed, and looked confused at this appeal, and muttered some contradictory compliments. "Oh, I am very well now," said Miss Temple. "You must come and dine with me," said Lady Bellair to Count Mirabel, "because you talk well across the table. I want a man who talks well across the table. So few can do it without bellowing. I think you do it very well." "Naturally," replied the Count. "If I did not do it well, I should not do it at all." "Ah, you are audacious," said the old lady. "I like a little impudence. It is better to be impudent than to be servile." "Mankind are generally both," said the Count. "I think they are," said the old lady. "Pray, is that old Duke of Thingabob alive? You know who I mean. He was a milliardaire, and a relation of yours." "De Crillon. He is dead, and his son too." "He was a great talker," said Lady Bellair, "but then he was the tyrant of conversation. Now men were made to listen as well as to talk." "Without doubt," said the Count, "for nature has given us 2 ears, but only 1 mouth." "You said that we might all be very happy," whispered Lord Montfort to Miss Grandison. "What think you? Have we succeeded?" "I think we all look very confused," said Miss Grandison. "What a fortunate idea it was inviting Lady Bellair and the Count. They could never look confused." "Watch Henrietta," said Lord Montfort. "It is not fair. How silent Ferdinand is!" "Yes, he is not quite sure whether he is Christopher Sly or not," said Lord Montfort. "What a fine embarrassment you have contrived, Miss Grandison." "Nay, Digby, you were the author of it. I cannot help thinking of your interview with Mr. Temple. You were prompt." "Why, I can be patient, fair Catherine," said Lord Montfort; "but in the present instance I shrank from suspense, more, however, for others than myself. It certainly was a singular interview." "And were you not nervous?" "Why, no. I felt convinced that the interview could only have one result. I thought of your memorable words. I felt I was doing what you wished, and that I was making all of us happy. However, all honour be to Mr. Temple. He has proved himself a man of sense." As the dinner proceeded, there was an attempt on all sides to be gay. Count Mirabel talked a great deal, and Lady Bellair laughed at what he said, and maintained her reputation for repartee. Her ladyship had been for a long time anxious to seize hold of her gay neighbour, and it was evident that he was quite a favourite. Even Ferdinand grew a little more at his ease. He ventured to relieve the Duke from some of his labours, and carve for Miss Temple. "What do you think of our family party?" said Henrietta to Ferdinand in a low voice. "I can only think of one thing," said Ferdinand. "I am so nervous," she continued, "that it seems to me I shall every minute shriek and leave the room." "I feel the same. I am stupefied." "Talk to Mr. Glastonbury. Drink wine and talk. Look at your mother. She is watching us. She is dying to speak to you, and so is someone else." At length the ladies withdrew. Ferdinand attended them to the door of the dining room. Lady Bellair shook her fan at him, but said nothing. He pressed his mother's hand. "Good bye, cousin Ferdinand," said Miss Grandison in a laughing tone. Henrietta smiled upon him as she passed by. It was a speaking glance, and touched his heart. The gentleman remained behind much longer than was the custom in Mr. Temple's house. Everybody seemed resolved to drink a great deal of wine, and Mr. Temple always addressed himself to Ferdinand, if anything were required, in a manner which seemed to recognise his responsible position in the family. Anxious as Ferdinand was to escape to the drawing room, he could not venture on the step. He longed to speak to Glastonbury on the subject which engrossed his thoughts, but he had not courage. Never did a man, who really believed himself the happiest and most fortunate person in the world, ever feel more awkward and more embarrassed. Was his father aware of what had occurred? He could not decide. Apparently Henrietta imagined that his mother did, by the observation which she had made at dinner. Then his father must be conscious of everything. Katherine must have told all. Were Lord Montfort's family in the secret? But what use were these perplexing inquiries? It was certain that Henrietta was to be his bride, and that Mr. Temple had sanctioned their alliance. There could be no doubt of that, or why was he there? At length the gentleman rose, and Ferdinand once more beheld Henrietta Temple. As he entered, she was crossing the room with some music in her hand. She was a moment alone. He stopped. He would have spoken, but his lips would not move. "Well," she said, "are you happy?" "My head wanders. Assure me that it is all true," he muttered in an agitated voice. "It is all true. There, go and speak to Lady Armine. I am as nervous as you are." Ferdinand seated himself by his mother. "Well, Ferdinand," she said, "I have heard wonderful things." "And I hope they have made you happy, mother." "I should, indeed, be both unreasonable and ungrateful if they did not. But I confess to you, my dear child, I am even as much astonished as gratified." "And my father, he knows everything?" "Everything. But we have heard it only from Lord Montfort and Katherine. We have had no communication with any one else. And we meet here to day in this extraordinary manner, and but for them we should be completely in the dark." "And the duchess? Do they know all?" "I conclude so." "'Tis very strange, is it not?" "I am quite bewildered." "Oh, mother, is she not beautiful? Do you not love her? Shall we not all be the happiest family in the world?" "I think we ought to be, dear Ferdinand, but I have not recovered from my astonishment. Oh, my child, why did you not tell me when you were ill?" "Is it not for the best that affairs should have taken the course they have done? But you must blame Kate as well as me. Dear Kate!" "I think of her," said Lady Armine. "I hope Kate will be happy." "She must be, dear mother. Only think what an excellent person is Lord Montfort." "He is indeed an excellent person," said Lady Armine; "but if I had been engaged to you, Ferdinand, and it ended by my marrying Lord Montfort, I should be very disappointed." "The duchess would be of a different opinion," said Ferdinand. Lady Bellair, who was sitting on a sofa opposite, and had hitherto been conversing with the duchess, who had now quitted her and joined the musicians, began shaking her fan at Ferdinand in a manner which signified her extreme desire that he should approach her. "Well, Lady Bellair," said Ferdinand, seating himself by her side. "I'm in on the secret, you know," said her ladyship. "What secret, Lady Bellair?" "Ah! you will not commit yourself. Well, I like discretion. I have always seen it from the first. No one has worked for you as I have. I like true love, and I have left her all my china in my will." "I am sure the legatee is very fortunate, whoever she may be." "Ah, you rogue! You know very well whom I mean. You are saucy. You never had a warmer friend than myself. I always admired you. You have a great many good qualities, and a great many bad ones. You always were a little saucy, but I like a little spice of sauciness. I think it takes. I hear you are good friends with Count Thingabob, the count whose grandfather I danced with 70 years ago. That is right. Always have distinguished friends. Never have fools for friends. They are of no use. I suppose he is in on the secret too?" "Really, Lady Bellair, I am in no secret. You quite excite my curiosity." "Well, I can't get anything out of you, I see that. However, it all happened at my house, that can't be denied. I tell you what I will do. I will give you all a dinner, and then the world will be quite certain that I made the match." Lady Armine joined them, and Ferdinand seized the opportunity of effecting his escape to the piano. "I suppose Henrietta has found her voice again now," whispered Catherine to her cousin. "Dear Catherine, really if you are so malicious I shall punish you," said Ferdinand. "Well, the comedy is nearly concluded. We shall join hands, and the curtain will drop." "And I hope, in your opinion, not an unsuccessful performance?" "Why, I certainly cannot quarrel with the catastrophe," said Miss Grandison. In the meantime the Count Mirabel had obtained possession of Mr. Temple, and lost no opportunity of confirming every favourable view which that gentleman had been influenced by Lord Montfort to take of Ferdinand and his conduct. Mr. Temple was quite convinced that his daughter must be very happy, and that the alliance, on the whole, would be productive of every satisfaction that he had ever anticipated. The evening drew on, carriages were announced, guests retired, Ferdinand lingered, Mr. Temple was ushering Lady Bellair, the last guest, to a carriage. Ferdinand and Henrietta were alone. They looked at each other. Their eyes met at the same moment. There was but one mode of satisfactorily terminating their mutual embarrassments. They sprang into each other's arms. Ah! that was a moment of rapture, sweet, thrilling, rapid. There was no need of words. Their souls vaulted over all petty explanations. Upon her lips, her choice and trembling lips, he sealed his gratitude and his devotion. The sound of footsteps was heard. The agitated Henrietta made her escape by an opposite entrance. Mr. Temple returned. He met Captain Armine with his hat, and inquired whether Henrietta had retired; and, when Ferdinand answered in the affirmative, wished him good night, and begged him to breakfast with them to morrow. End of Book 6, Chapter 24. Recording by Todd.
Book 6, Chapter 25 of Henrietta Temple. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli. Book 6, Chapter 25, which, though final, it is hoped will prove satisfactory. Our kind reader will easily comprehend that from the happy day we have just noticed, Ferdinand Armine was seldom absent from Grosvenor Square, or from the society of Henrietta Temple. Both were so happy that they soon overcame any little embarrassment which their novel situation might first occasion them. In this effort, however, they were greatly encouraged by the calm demeanour of Lord Montfort, and the complacent carriage of his intended bride. The world wondered and whispered, marvelled and hinted, but nothing disturbed Lord Montfort, and Catherine had the skill to silence raillery. Although it was settled that the respective marriages should take place as soon as possible, the settlements necessarily occasioned delay. By the application of his funded property, and by a charge upon his Yorkshire estates, Mr. Temple paid off the mortgages on Armine, which, with a certain life charge in his own favour, was settled in strict entail upon the issue of his daughter. A certain portion of the income was to be set aside annually to complete the castle, and until that edifice was ready to receive them, Ferdinand and Henrietta were to live with Mr. Temple, principally at Ducie, which Mr. Temple had now purchased. In spite, however, of the lawyers, the eventful day at length arrived. Both happy couples were married at the same time, and in the same place, and Glastonbury performed the ceremony. Lord and Lady Montfort departed for a seat in Sussex, belonging to his father. Ferdinand and Henrietta repaired to Armine, while Sir Ratcliffe and his lady paid a visit to Mr. Temple in Yorkshire, and Glastonbury found himself once more in his old quarters in Lancashire with the Duke and Duchess. Once more at Armine, wandering once more together in the old pleasaunce, it was so strange and sweet that both Ferdinand and Henrietta almost began to believe that it was well that the course of their true love had for a moment not run so smoothly as at present, and they felt that their adversity had rendered them even more sensible of their illimitable bliss. And the woods of Ducie, they were not forgotten, nor least of all the old farmhouse that had been his shelter. Certainly they were the happiest people that ever lived, and though some years have now passed since these events took place, custom has not sullied the brightness of their love. They have no cares now, and yet both have known enough of sorrow to make them rightly appreciate their unbroken and unbounded blessings. When the honeymoon was fairly over, for neither of them would bate a jot of this good old-fashioned privilege, Sir Ratcliffe and Lady Armine returned to the Place, and Glastonbury to his tower, while Mr. Temple joined them at Ducie, accompanied by Lord and Lady Montfort. The autumn also brought the Count Mirabell to slaughter the pheasants, gay, brilliant, careless, kind-hearted as ever. He has ever remained one of Ferdinand's most cherished friends. Indeed, I hardly think that there is any individual to whom Ferdinand is more attached. And after all, as the Count often observes, if it had not been for Ferdinand's scrapes, they would not have known each other. Nor was Lord Catch-him-who-can passed over. Ferdinand Armine was not the man to neglect a friend or to forget a good service, and he has conferred on that good-natured, though somewhat improvident, young nobleman more substantial kindness than the hospitality which is always cheerfully extended to him. When Ferdinand repaid Mr. Bond Sharp his £1,500, he took care that the interest should appear in the shape of a golden vase, which is now not the least gorgeous ornament of that worthy's splendid sideboard. The deer have appeared again, too, in the park of Armine, and many a haunch smokes on the Epicurean table of Cleveland Row. Lady Bellair is as lively as ever, and bids fair to amuse society as long as the famous Countess of Desmond, who lived to the age of 110, and died by a fall from a cherry-tree then. What a frisky old girl! In her annual progresses through the kingdom, she never omits laying under contribution every establishment of the three families, in whose fortunes she was so unexpectedly mixed up. As her ladyship persists in asserting, and perhaps now really believes, that both matches were the result of her matrimonial craft, it would be the height of ingratitude if she ever could complain of the want of a hearty welcome. In the daily increasing happiness of his beloved daughter, Mr. Temple has quite forgotten any little disappointment which he might once have felt at not having a duke for a son-in-law, and such a duke as his valued friend Lord Montfort. But Ferdinand Armine is blessed with so sweet a temper that it is impossible to live with him and not love him, and the most cordial intimacy and confidence subsist between the father of Henrietta Temple and his son-in-law. From the aspect of public affairs also, Mr. Temple, though he keeps this thought to himself, is inclined to believe that a coronet may yet grace the brow of his daughter, and that the barony of Armine may be revived. Soon after the passing of the memorable Act of 1828, Lord Montfort became the representative of his native county, and an active and influential member of the House of Commons. After the Reform, Mr. Armine was also returned for a borough situate near the Duke's principal seat, and although Lord Montfort and Mr. Armine both adhere to the Whig politics of their families, they have both also, in the most marked manner, abstained from voting on the Appropriation Clause, and there is little doubt that they will ultimately support that British and national administration which Providence has doubtless in store for these outraged and distracted realms. At least this is Mr. Temple's more than hope, who is also in the House, and acts entirely with Lord Stanley. The Montforts and the younger Armines contrive, through mutual visits and a town residence during the session, to pass the greater part of their lives together. They both honestly confess that they are a little in love with each other's wives, but this only makes their society more agreeable. The family circle at Armine has been considerably increased of late. There is a handsome young Armine who has been christened Glastonbury, a circumstance which repays the tenant of the Tower for all his devotion, and this blending of his name and memory with the illustrious race that has so long occupied his thoughts and hopes is to him a source of constant self-congratulation. The future Sir Glastonbury has also two younger brothers, quite worthy of the blood, Temple and Digby, and the most charming sister in the world, with large violet eyes and long dark lashes, who is still in arms, and who bears the hallowed name of Henrietta. And thus ends our love story. End of Book 6, Chapter 25. End of Henrietta Temple by Benjamin Disraeli.